reading that introduction. I'm just going to hand it off to one of the greatest governors in the United States, Governor Jared Polis.
Just going to push this down here.
Go ahead and set that.
Well, hello, everybody. And Michael, thank you. Is this on? Oh, hello? I don't think it's on.
No, let me turn on your mic for you. That would help. There you go.
You know, my voice. Hello. There we go, everybody. Sorry, my voice is a little hoarse. Thank you, Michael. It's great to be back at ClimateCon. You know, no matter what happens in Washington, Colorado is forging ahead to take bold action on climate to improve air quality. And thankfully, it's not just Colorado. It's many states, indeed nearly every state in some form. We've appreciated the help we've gotten out of Washington in the last few years, but we also know that we can never take that for granted. And when I began as governor, we had a challenging environment in Washington 6 years ago, and we might very well have that again, but it doesn't mean we can't, as a state, forge the important relationships we need, both within our state as well as internationally, to deliver on climate policy that reduces our emissions and reduces the impact of global warming. We're really focused on innovation and collaboration. I'm going to go into some of the steps that we're taking as a state to build our clean energy future, save people money. These kind of events are important to come together and share best practices in so many ways. And as we move from a period of historic federal investment in climate action to one in which states, the private sector will truly lead the way. Our leadership as Colorado, the leadership of you in this room, is in many ways more important than ever before. When I ran for governor, many viewed my goal of Colorado achieving 100% renewable energy by 2040 as unachievable. Well, today, as it stands, working with the utilities, we've locked in more than 80% renewable energy by 2030. That's in just 5 more years. And we very much have the path to decarbonize the power, the electricity sector by 2040. And of course, while we care deeply about the electricity sector, we also see a lot of action on many other fronts. I'm proud that, for instance, Colorado is now #1 in electric vehicle sales. Nearly a third of all new vehicles sold in our state are now electric. And we're able to do that by reducing the price of electric vehicles. We also reduce the price of e-bikes for people who could make the switch, for whom those work for their commute, to both save people money and improve our air quality and show our leadership on climate. And with these actions, we're saving people money. We know that as we build out our electrified future with EVs and modern manufacturing and clean buildings, we know that wind and solar will be the low-cost workhorses of the clean energy economy, but we also know that we need to work to establish that solid base of power to be able to incorporate the benefits of those variable power sources into the grid. And that with our recently adopted nation-leading deep well geothermal rules, we're facilitating the development of geothermal energy here in Colorado. Currently 0% of our electrical grid. In Utah, it's 3%. In California, it's 5%. We have great geophysical characteristics for geothermal, and we have at least 3 utility scale projects in planning. We hope that 1 or 2, or perhaps all 3 of those can come to fruition here in the next few years. Proven technology. We're also experimenting with deep well technology using old oil wells and some of the companies doing that. But we also have proven technology, geothermal electric plants that exist in other states that we can, in fact, deploy here as well. And we wanted to make sure that we can streamline the getting to market for those. We're also looking, of course, at the impact of climate change in Colorado, separately and distinct from our climate leadership. And that's everything from extreme heat to impacts on our world-class outdoors to drought and wildfire. The risks have gone up across the West. We've seen the horrific fires in California. We've upped our fire preparedness, but we're also taking action to reduce and mitigate risk where possible. As we look at how we can make living in our state more affordable, we also look to the nexus of housing, climate, and transit. Namely, how can people afford to live closer to job centers rather than being forced to live further out and have to commute longer distances, leading to congestion, worse air quality, and higher carbon emissions. And that's why we've been very focused on expanding the opportunities for people to live affordably near job centers and near transit, along with investing in transit, including marquee projects like Front Range Passenger Rail, Mountain Rail, and of course investing in more reliable bus service for those who want the opportunity to be able to commute and get to where they want to go that way. In doing that, we can save people time and money. It might mean a family of four might only need or want to have one vehicle instead of two. Some people will just use timeshare vehicles if they don't need one, and those savings can go to other things that are important for them in their lives to make Colorado more livable. We also have moved with several investments in transit from the 44th lowest transit funding of any state to the 22nd. And we're really moving full speed ahead. We recently released our Colorado Transportation Vision 2035 that set our goal of significantly increasing the opportunity for Coloradans who choose to get where they want to go by train, bus, bike, or walking. Walkable communities, bikeable communities, transit, rail, we show that there are many Coloradans who want to use these opportunities to get where they want to go today and currently don't have them. We're proud to be #1 in the nation for electric vehicle sales, and we know that reducing pollution, achieving our climate goals can be easy, affordable, and fun, and we're thrilled to see Coloradans take advantage of these opportunities. We also hear from many Coloradans that are already dealing with the increased costs from climate change. Namely, many of you have probably seen your homeowners insurance rates go up. That's largely a function of claims and risk. And so in addition to taking bold climate action, we're working with the legislature to expand access to homeowners insurance, to look at cost drivers. And by the way, it's not just fires. In fact, the largest cost driver of the increase that you're probably facing is actually hail damage. That's increased. That's about 60 to 70% of the increase in homeowners insurance. It's about a third the risk of fire damage. And we have to, as we build in this new environment, use some of the stronger and hail-proof roofs to prevent them from being destroyed with the more frequent hail events, particularly in the Eastern Front Range. In addition to the state leading the private sector, we're also excited to work with local government. And one of our initiatives now is to reduce and streamline the permitting to remove delays around rooftop solar and other clean energy applications that people want to deploy in their homes. We're also looking at how we can provide lower cost financing for home electrical efficiency or renewable generation improvements with on-tariff financing, meaning that it can effectively be financed by the reductions in your own usage, conveying with the future owners of the property through reductions in your utility bill. And we're also working to make sure that we can do this at the community level as well. So, as the federal government, we think, and very likely steps back, the doors continue to remain open for bold leadership at the state level, the local level, and very importantly, the private sector level, as consumers, for instance, evaluate in their own lives the benefits of electric vehicles, not just lower operating costs, 2/3 less per passenger mile, taking into the account the cost of electricity versus gas, as well as reduced maintenance over time, but quieter, easier to use, more functional, many features that people want as well. But also being able to show how people can save money on their home electrical bills through more efficiency, through rooftop solar and other techniques that help empower people to be part of the solution as well, even as we work with the utility sector to keep rates low and transition to lower cost renewable energy. In many ways, this is what makes Colorado special: our quality of life, protecting our amazing outdoor areas, saving people money, giving people the opportunity to live closer to job centers in a way that's affordable rather than further out with a negative and detrimental impact on water, on land, and on climate. In Colorado, we are, no matter what happens in Washington, we're innovating and working together and moving forward, and we want to continue to raise the bar to build a clean energy future. We also have a very active relationship on climate innovation with a number of other countries. In fact, we just signed a memorandum of understanding with the United Kingdom, adding to our work with several other countries, where we continue to lead working with states and other nations on climate technology and implementing climate smart solutions in sectors that range from transportation to agriculture to buildings to manufacturing. I know everybody here is deeply committed to this work, and your work as individuals in many ways is more important than ever before, given that we now, you, us, the state, individuals, have the opportunity and the responsibility to lead when we know that Washington won't, and we know that delay and inaction is not an option. It's up to us to continue this fight forward with as many collaborators and innovators across our state, across the country, and across the world. Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Fantastic words. Thanks so much. Appreciate you, man.
All right, so instead of printing my notes on paper, I actually have them on my phone. So if you see me looking at my phone, I'm not on Instagram. So this will be a question for both of you. Highlight how you, as meteorologists, address the topic of climate change on air. How do you maintain a balance to ensure your audience is both well-informed but not overwhelmed?
So my goal as a meteorologist is to explain climate change in the way that everybody can understand. It's not easy topic, so I have to try to talk about facts, science, in the way that everybody, like I said, can understand. So I like to talk about solutions. I like to talk about positive actions that we are doing. I think we are doing so many things, good things, so that is important to talk about it. So in that way, everybody is informed and know everybody, or they feel like they don't feel hopeless. So that's why I have to talk science in the easy way, because it's not easy. And I have to talk to, especially when we have to talk about climate change, that not everybody is believing that. So I have to talk about that in a simple way and talk about solutions, that I love to talk about solutions.
I think that's a really good approach, is to be a bit more positive. I'll say I have two kind of distinct philosophies on how I communicate climate change. One would be I pick and choose, and number two is I really localize. I try and pick out things that maybe the average person living here may go, I might start by asking if whoever's raised, please raise your hand if you lived here longer than 30 years in Colorado. Okay? Handful of you. So it's really for those of you in particular where I think that's when you start getting to the time frame where there's notable changes in the climate, and trying to pick those out for you is one of the things not only that I think is my greatest service, but also something I kind of like to do, because I think it is interesting to see those, even obviously the backdrop of the changes is not something we want, but I do think it is the best service I can offer as a meteorologist in my role.
All right. What sorts of impacts are we seeing in Colorado from climate change, and how might they increase in the coming years and decades? Chris, a question for you.
So for the group that raised their hands, I'm going to go back to you here because remember it used to snow here in Colorado back in the 70s and 80s, and we've had measurable snow in Denver once in the last 25 years. Now, I'm going to say a couple things about that. One, I also think it's really important to not say every warm day is caused by climate change. That's a really important distinction. That would include, for example, yesterday. My own wife, as I was, she texted me, she goes, should I be weirded out by the fact that it's 70 at 9 in the morning on February the 3rd? I said, no, like that, obviously I think in this room, we're all, we all understand the impact of climate change here. But it's also just as important to point out when there may be some points of hyperbole behind it. Yesterday would be an example. Any warm winter day, you go back, yesterday's daily record, for example, was 70 degrees. That was time of the day in 1890 and 1954. And that's one small anecdotal example, but that goes to speak to the fact that where we live here in Colorado, we live in the lead of the Colorado Rockies, we get Chinook winds, we get downsloping dry winds. Could a warming climate be adding a degree or two to that? Perhaps, there's probably a good chance it is, but the fact that it was 70 degrees yesterday morning was not the result of a warming climate. However, and this is really important, going back to the September thing I mentioned, that very likely is. The fact that September is now August 2.0, and I say this on TV all the time, that to me is when I think we can drive home that. And also, the fact that our winter months here in Colorado, I think what we're starting to see signs that basically the fringe months, the spring and the fall, we're kind of compressing winter into December through February. Many of you will know that on average, March is our snowiest month of the year along the Front Range, along the urban corridor. March is now very, very hit or miss. We either get 40 inches of snow or get none. And there's always been a degree of that, but that's becoming more and more common. And it's every 3-4 years, we may get a monster snowstorm. For example, this past year, we had the Pi Day 2.0 snowstorm on March the 14th. But those are becoming slightly less common, but what's becoming more common, for example, we now have 4 straight colder than average Januaries, and the January we just had was our 21st coldest January on record in Denver. Statewide, probably we finished top 20 coldest January on record, and I think what we're starting to see, perhaps, and again, limited data because it's relatively soon, but we're starting to see the winter months compress a little bit, and the summer months are elongating, and I would say particularly September, October, we're starting to see those months. I mean, honestly, for me, those are the months of the year I feel most okay taking a vacation because there's rarely impactful weather now in September and October. Anybody who's lived here for a long time, all those raise your hands. I mean, 1997, we had a pretty crippling snowstorm in late September 1997. We had one in 1993 as well. Denver Broncos also didn't make it to their game in Buffalo with that game. I mean, that stuff used to happen, and we've had one snow in the last 25 years. Anybody remember that one? It was 5 years ago. It was the week of the Cameron Peak fire. That Labor Day snowstorm went from 101 to about 30 degrees in the span of about 48 hours. And that in and of itself is perhaps a sign of a warming climate too. Just these wild swings accompanied by monster wildfires. So hopefully that answers a little bit about where we're seeing the warming climate. Again, it's not individual warm December days, individual warm February days. That is a part of life here in the Rockies, and that's important to point out. It's also important to point out where we are seeing it, in my opinion, in September and October, and to a lesser degree, even these winter months that are getting colder, that may also be a sign of a warming climate.
All right. Nirman, this question's for you. You mentioned that Telemundo has specific programs where you educate your audience on weather patterns, climate change, and environmental critical issues. Can you talk more about this?
Of course. At Telemundo, we have a special program called Nuestro Planeta, in English, Our Planet. We present that in our newscast every afternoon, every Friday. We talk about contamination, we talk about environment, we talk about climate change, and Telemundo meteorologists across the country, we used to work together for this program. So every Friday, for example, last Friday, our report was about contamination from Dallas. The meteorologists from Dallas did a report. Next Friday, or this Friday, is going to be from Boston, so on. So that is important to mention that Nuestro Planeta is a special program to educate, to talk about what is happening, and of course, the solution. Before that program, Telemundo Colorado was working, I was working on doing reports here in Colorado, for example, talking about Veol. They are switching to electric buses, solar panels at the airport, so many things that is happening right now in Colorado, and we used to talk about it. So if you miss the report in our live, in our newscast, you can go to the app, you can go to the website, and we have a section there that you can check all the reports, all the programs that we have done. In that way, if you miss it, you can find it there for forever.
Yeah, maybe after the conference follow-up, maybe we can include some of those links so that people can find those educational programs.
Yeah, of course. Telemundocolorado.com. We have the app too, so you can check it.
Excellent. Okay, this question's for both of you. Will you please define some of the differences between weather and climate?
Well, so weather is obviously more day to day. Climate is an elongated period of time. Now that can vary, right? I mean, we just had a very, very warm December. That's 30 days, and part of that's a collection of individual days. But the important difference, I think, the broad perspective is months, years versus day to day, and it's a really important distinction. And again, that goes back to what I was saying about also within the realm of what we do is pointing out when things are weather. So for example, an individual really cold day, like we had a couple of them last month, that doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening, just like an individual 95-degree day in July is not necessarily a direct byproduct of a warming climate either. So hopefully that answers that.
I have another point. Weather is like person mood. You can change it every day, every time. And climate is like personality. So it's something that you have for a long time. It's you. So that is.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I never quite thought about it that way.
Because the weather is changing all the time, and we can change our feeling like this, like every hour.
So it'd be like, I don't know, I'm crabby because I didn't get enough sleep, so I'm being a jerk today. But you are a jerk would be the long term. I'm not calling you a jerk, but that would be hopefully the analogy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I work in the morning, so often I have some crabby days.
Yeah, I asked him what time he wakes up for his morning shift. He said 2:30. Jeremiah, this one's for you. Why do you tell people when they say they don't believe in climate change?
Well, my job is to educate, to try to let them know that there is evidence that is happening. Maybe not where you live, but it's happening around the world, so you don't have to think just in where you are. So it's important to know that it's happening, and for example, if they don't want to talk about it, it's okay too, because sometimes they are afraid about bad news and they don't want to talk about it. If you don't want to talk about climate change, it's okay too, because if you don't want to talk about it, it doesn't mean that you don't believe on that. It's maybe because you don't want to talk about it, because you don't understand, or maybe you don't want to talk about bad news. So you have to respect that. So I have to show them science, I have to show them what is happening, and it's up to you if you want to believe it or no, but I'm doing my job. Another thing is, for example, so many people, they don't think that they can fix it. In that way, they avoid that topic. So it's a hard topic. I can say it's a hard topic, but just because you don't want to talk about it, it doesn't mean that you don't believe in climate change. So, but my job is to be on camera all the time, trying to talk about it, and that's why I don't want to talk about bad things all the time. I want to talk about good things, as I said before, so in that way, not everybody feel like hopeless what is happening and what we can do and what we are doing.
What about for people who believe the earth is flat?
They can believe whatever they want to believe. So I would ask them why they believe that. So I love to hear what is the point, so I have to respect that too. So yeah, I don't know, maybe here somebody believes that the earth is flat.
I'll chime in here too on that, because I think that's an interesting point, because I would say it's a general read the room policy on my end. So like, am I responding to a bot on Twitter that says, oh no, like it snowed 15 inches yesterday, like what's going on? It's like, I was just telling Brian over here the story at lunch was, I got married a year and a half ago. My uncle flew in from England to come to my wedding, very, very nice guy. And we had a lovely dinner, we sat down, things were going great. And then at the very end of it, after dessert, paying the bill for me, great. He goes, what do you think of climate change? And I go, where are you going? Where are you going with this, Uncle Bill? And that was in my mind, just the wheels are spinning. Because like, you know, the Monday before your wedding, I'm not getting into anything. You know, we're not talking politics or anything, you know, what shouldn't be, you get my point there. Just not gonna let anything spiral. So I just put it back to the side, what do you think of climate change? And he had just read a book on the plane that had moved him in a certain direction, so I just let him air out his grievances. But to Nirma's point, I think it's important to educate when you can, and to me, I think the best way to do it is put the facts out there, and not to be fatalistic or laissez-faire about it, but there's so much you can do at a certain point, right? I mean, if you're gonna battle with the Twitter bot, you know, that's probably gonna just derail your own day. If I battle with my uncle, you know, probably wake up real annoyed, and my wife's gonna be like, why did you do that? Like, you know, before the wedding. Pick your battles, right? Pick your battles, read the room, and that's what I would say. You have to win every battle.
Yeah, what happened to me is my mom is scared all the time. When she watches the news, she's scared about everything that is happening. That's why I prefer about, that's why I want to talk about solutions, because I know my mom is afraid about so many things happening. And I used to say, Mom, relax, it's just a news, Mom. And I have to explain to her, but all the time, every day, she's watching something in social media. So every day something. So I know that so many people are like my mom, scared about the thing. And so you have to find a way to don't be stressed or living afraid about what is happening. So that's why it's important to do the news calm, relax, and not like crazy, and talk about good things too.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Making sure that we're not fear-mongering, but showing people that there are solutions that can better our communities. Chris, I do have another question for you. If you want to expand on how early and late seasons are starting and ending.
Yeah, so here in Colorado, I think the best way to think about our climate is we have two distinct climates, right? It's mountains and plains. You know, what Nirma and I do, we work in a set geographic area, and in TV it's known as a DMA, designated market area. And essentially the way I like to think of it here in Colorado is we have two different ones, because, you know, it can be ripping snow in the mountains. At the Eisenhower-Johnson Tunnel is 50 miles from here. You might have a foot of snow, and here it's 55, a little windy with some clouds. And I say that because the way that climate is impacting the mountains, you know, for example, if you look at snowpack numbers over the last, I mean, we've had really good records since the early 1980s, some records going back to the 50s. There's not a huge change in snowpack numbers, but what we are seeing, for example, we're seeing some big changes, particularly in the San Juans and the San Cristos, if you're unfamiliar. These are southernmost river basins and mountain ranges. That would be Telluride, Alamosa, the sand dunes, that area. That's where you start to see more hit or miss snow seasons. For example, this is a pretty bad one, even though I-70 mountains, generally speaking, we're doing okay this winter. The San Juans and the San Cristos, the wet mountains, they're having a pretty rough go, and that's been a fairly common theme. And part of that is they're a bit further south, and they need a specific kind of storm. So similar to what you see in California, very hit or miss water seasons in California. We're starting to see that influence our weather, in particular our southern mountains. So that'd be a starting point. In terms of the seasons, and I mentioned this earlier, here along the Front Range, I think you're starting to see a compression of the winter, which means that we're actually seeing fairly snowy Decembers, Januaries, and especially Februarys. You know, February right now, of course, breaking news. And we're seeing those months get a bit snowier, and in some cases even colder, but the fringe months around it are getting notably warmer, particularly on the autumn end. And you look at March, April, May. April, May snowfalls used to be a more common thing. In fact, April still is, on average, our second snowiest month of the year, but that is becoming less and less common. You know, getting a blockbuster April storm now is not, last one we had that I can remember is 2015. I think we had one in 2017 too, but, you know, you used to never really go 7, 8 years without a blockbuster April storm. That was just kind of a given here. Now you're lucky to get one. And so again, I would say spring and autumn are the 2 times a year where you're really seeing the impact of warm climate most. Final thing I'll close with here is in our summer months. This is kind of important here in Denver. And I think one of the points where we can really hone our messaging is for those of you who live here for a long time, you used to really not need air conditioning here. There's science and data behind that. Our average summertime temperature in Denver between June and August was on a long-term basis between about 1950 and 1990, about 72.5 degrees, so about room temperature. Now that temperature is about 76 degrees, which 3.5 degree difference. That's the difference between, I would not want to be wearing this jacket in a 76 degree room. I'm sure you wouldn't either. That's the difference between needing air conditioning versus not. I think that's one of the more tangible ways to express and to show the impact of a warming climate here along the Front Range and in Denver specifically.
Okay. So following that up, Nirma, are measures, are there more storms or are they just stronger?
I think they are getting stronger, even though NASA is saying that we have the same number of hurricanes each year, almost the same, but they are getting stronger. So that is the data from NASA, and it's important to say that we have more information around the world, we have more data, so in that way we have more to report. So I think they are getting stronger. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add something else?
Yeah, I'll say, I think one of the things we've seen is rapid intensification is more common. RI, rapid intensification. So the computer forecast models, the way computer forecast models work, the ones that frankly we rely on to do our jobs, they're basically a giant numerical equation simulating the atmosphere. I say that those were decades ago, and they cannot keep up with just how quickly hurricanes develop. And for example, the Gulf of Mexico, what was it? We had times where it was 95 degrees in the Gulf, off the Florida Keys, all the coral bleaching that's been going on there. And that just leads, it's a jacuzzi in the Gulf of Mexico. And I mean that in a bad way, obviously, where you've got hurricanes, their fuel is 80 degree temperatures, but you got 90, 95 degrees. It's not, 10 degrees warmer. That's an exponential amount of water that the atmosphere can hold, and you have, maybe an innocent looking tropical storm. Is a different story for another day. But next thing you know, it's a Cat 5 monster heading straight for Tampa. And Tampa's had a couple of really close calls in recent years. Of course, you have Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Ian, some of these storms that just blew up, and that's all happened within the last 5 years. So I think, to Nirma's point, I think what we're seeing are these storms just really blow up like this, and that, again, the modeling hasn't accounted for that yet. And they all say, it might be a Cat 1, Cat 2, next thing you know, it's Cat 5.
Yeah, I did grow up in Florida and in the Tampa area. That's kind of why you gave me a little side eye. But I would say I have noticed a lot more Cat 5 and Cat 4 storms in the past couple years than my whole life living there. So it is kind of crazy how you see something scoot along as a Cat 1 and all of a sudden it's a Cat 4 or 5. So it's been really scary watching that happen to my family and friends that are still in Florida. So Chris, what are some trends? I know you talked about a lot of different kinds of trends, but what are some of the ones that are surprising you the most?
That's a good question. What sorts of trends? Well, again, winter is mostly holding strong here in Colorado. Again, depends on what analysis you use. You look at San Juan, San Pedro Cristo, snowpack numbers. Yes, those are down. But in general, snowpack is about what it is. When you're talking about something as big as adding a couple degrees of temperature to the atmosphere, we, as an enterprise, meteorologists, climatologists, simply can't account for all the snowball domino effects that's going to lead to. So, for example, we just had a major Arctic blast, 2-3 weeks ago here in Colorado. That is now our 5th consecutive year, I believe, with a notable intrusion of true polar air into here. And of course, that leads to all sorts of people going, well, what's going on? Like, what climate change? It's -20, or here it dropped to -16, the -30 wind chill. Again, that was 2.5 weeks ago here. We had it a year ago, almost on the same day, on MLK Day, and before that, December 2022, a lot of you might remember, that was the fiasco that led to the Southwest Airlines thing. We had a horrible -25-degree air temperature here in Denver. Part of that, and to what's maybe surprising, and again, some of these things that we're going to learn in time, there are more things like this that we just don't know yet, but the domino effect of adding 2 to 3 degrees of temperature to the atmosphere may be weakening the jet stream. And when the jet stream is weakening, the jet stream is the narrow ribbon of really strong winds, 30,000 feet up. By the way, fun fact, right over us right now. And when you have that really strong ribbon of winds, which tends to maximize during the winter months, it thrives off of, it's basically a border between really cold air and really warm air. It tends to be at its strongest during the winter and kind of the late fall, early spring months. That's when it's at its strongest. That's why, by the way, March is our snowiest month of the year, is that the jet stream is usually ripping, and then we can get some really strong storms because of that. And I say that because if you have much warmer air at the poles, where you're seeing temperatures warm the most, that's weakening that division between warmer air in, say, the continental United States versus northern Canada and northern Alaska. And so if you have that jet stream weakening, it's more prone to dips, which means that polar air is dipping down more and more often. You probably heard the term polar vortex, which is a swirl of low pressure up at the poles, which is obviously a naturally occurring phenomenon, but because the poles are warming so much quicker than the rest of the, compared to a place like here, the rest of the world, that may be weakening the jet stream. That's one of those examples of surprising things. But to localize that here in Colorado, again, you look at the temperature and snowfall data, somebody who may be a bot would correctly pick out, December, January, and February are not that much colder, and we've now had 4 consecutive colder than average Januaries in Denver and Colorado. Is that may be the result of that, but there's things that are going to continue to come up like that in the coming years and decades that we just don't know yet.
Okay, I have one last question for both of you, and then we can kind of open it up to the audience. What, in your opinion, is holding us back from making progress on climate change?
I think all the countries need to work together, because so many countries, they don't have the money to have the clean energy. So we have to educate too, because some of them, for example, in 4 countries, they are not thinking about climate change. We have to educate them, because they are not thinking about climate change because they are thinking, they don't know what is happening. They don't have any idea. They don't have the information. They are thinking what to eat, what day. They don't have time to think what is happening with the climate. So they are thinking about to survive. So they don't have any idea what is happening when it's raining, when something happening in the country. So that's why all the countries need to work together. In that way, we can be together on this, and we can do more things in this. Because I know, for example, I don't want to mention any country, but some of them, they are thinking about how to live, how to have the money to buy the food, so they are not thinking about something that we are thinking right now here and trying to make the solutions. So I think what is one of the point, and another point is, for example, companies, they used to make money with oil or something like affect us, but they want to make more money, so they don't care sometimes. So that is important to keep in mind, that we have to think about so many things, and the transition is hard, it's not easy, we are working on it, but we have to think all together, and we have to work all together.
I think that's the best answer, what Nirma said, which is the way that affects people is in very different ways. We have to be conscious of that. The way people see it in India, where people are trying to survive more day to day than we are. I think we have to be conscious of that. I'll offer a real hot take here. I'll say here domestically, obviously, in my opinion, the biggest challenge is politics, and because there's a degree of subjectivity to things I'm saying and that we're saying, people prey on that for their own agendas. Whatever you want to think about something, there's a podcast or a YouTube video or a TikTok for that, right? So, and this age of, we have fractured truths, and that seeps into politics, and I do think that, again, there are things that meteorologists, climatologists, the state climatologist here in Colorado, by the way, Dr. Russ Schumacher, won Jeopardy, one of the smartest people we've got here. And there's things, we're back and forth emailing on stuff about like, why is Gunnison so cold? And he's a really smart dude, but there's just a degree of subjectivity to it, and people prey on that, and you get politics involved in that, and what Hiram was saying about flat earthers earlier. You want to believe that? Cool. I'm sure there's a podcast for that. I'm sure there's a YouTube video for that. I'm sure there's something, a book, or whatever. We just live in an era where you believe what you want to believe, and that seeps into politics. And sorry, that's a bit more of a negative hot take, but I really do think that that's the biggest problem right now that we face as an enterprise, not only the day-to-day aspect, which is more important, but also we're getting in our own way.
All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, but bringing it back to the positive though, education, right? So being responsible for how you educate yourself, where you get that information from.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So we're in quite a large room, so I'll have to bring the microphone to you, but does anybody have any questions that you want to ask?
I can just speak up. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Or do you want to bring it? Yeah, we all spread out. We kind of made friends in front, maybe. But I wondered if you could talk about maybe some of like the midterm changes. So in our climate, we have some 7 or 8 year weather patterns also that happen. So we have the short-term, seasonal, and then the long-term climate change. How does the midterm pattern and oscillation fit into that? And talk about some of the changes that we've seen, the amplitudes there. And is there a point where we see some of those weather patterns, that oscillation, the feedback loop kind of breaks down, and we don't get that oscillation. The oscillation becomes unstable in the midterm as well.
Just to clarify, are you talking about mid-latitudes or time scale?
Yeah, like I'm thinking like El Nino, La Nina, like these kinds of patterns that happen on the decade-long time scale that we historically expect to repeat over a certain period of time. Is there a lifetime on that?
I'll start by saying that, again, I would say it's worth noting, I promise I'll get to the answer here, because I'll kind of add a little perspective here. You will know better than I will that I think 110 years ago, the leading meteorologists in the world were priests in Cuba, right? Because they were the ones to figure out that hurricanes were eventually going to slam into the United States, and they warned, for example, the 1900 Galveston hurricane was preceded by dire warnings from Cuban priests who had a horrific one. I say that we advance now where, how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of meteorologists there are across the world and advanced satellites, and things have exponentially changed so quickly in such a short time span that our understanding of climate change is really about 40, 50 years old, roughly, and we're really starting to keep good data. So, there's things in the long term which we don't understand. And I'm sorry this is going to be a little disheartening, but I think when it comes to El Nino and La Nina, we're still seeing those sorts of things, and I think we're still seeing there may be, for example, El Ninos may be getting a little more extreme, La Ninas may become closer to average, but when it comes to a lot of those kind of medium-term specifics, I think the impact of a warming climate, we're still honestly figuring that out. Again, it may not be the answer I'd hope to give. I think there's more distinct answers that we can give, but I think when it comes to things like that, my understanding of the science, I don't know if you have anything else, is that we roughly don't have a great idea about some of those things and how it's impacting stuff. But for example, this is a La Nina. We're in a weak La Nina right now. We all know what's going on in Southern California right now. La Nina tends to lead to a drier Southern California winter. Now what we're seeing is obviously the extreme of the extremes there. Is that a byproduct of a warming climate? I think that'll take a lot more. That requires a decade, 2 decades worth of analysis rather than simply just saying this is a warming climate and something to do on the spot.
I can just speak on. Thank you. So my question has to do with vegetation and adaptation to climate. So you mentioned, for example, that September used to be a very snowy month in the past, but now we're used to fall being in late September. But if it snowed that much in September, did that mean that fall happened earlier? Or how soon does vegetation able to adapt to such climate change? And evolutionary cycles, as we know, are much longer. So, but is vegetation already adapting? Because I'm not really sure how snowy September you can still have late September falls.
I think that's a really good question. Is basically vegetation adapting? I think there's good-ish news there. Is that yes, our precipitation patterns are changing, but if you're adding water, basic physics, I'm sure most of you will know, you add water, the capacity for the atmosphere to hold more water, it increases exponentially. How that comes out is still very much in flux. We're still figuring that out. But precipitation patterns have not changed all that drastically yet, though we have noted drier falls in addition to warmer falls. So I don't think vegetation, my understanding of it, has been significantly altered yet. In places that are feeling more extreme impacts, for example, the poles, where you're now seeing permafrost turn to 9 months of frost instead of year-round, things like that. That's where you're starting to see those impacts that are directly affecting vegetation. My final point to that would be, one thing that will be of growing concern will be urban wildlife interface fires, so similar to the Marshall Fire. That and what we saw in Southern California, which is, we tend to think about wildfires specifically, and vegetation growth as traditionally thought of it as big forest fires, right? Cameron Peak, East Troublesome, those sorts of big wildfires. I think the growing concern will be dried out vegetation. For example, you go down to Douglas County, or even not too far away from here, where you have these huge open dry grass fields, and you haven't had rain for a month, it's 95 for 3 days on end, and you have a 100-degree dew point depression, minus 5-degree dew point, very dry air mass, and a 95-degree air temperature. That's where our concern will go towards. It's how does that vegetation not devolve into a massive wildfire because the evaporative stress is so high on things like that. When you have a 95-degree day, you're sucking out every last drop of water that's available, and then it dries out the vegetation like that. So the good news is, I would say it's generally good news, is we're probably not seeing huge impacts to our vegetation yet, but big emphasis on yet, and big emphasis on urban wildlife wildfires.
And the reason I asked the question is, with heavy snowfall in September, you have these tree branches breaking and disrupting power lines and all that. That's because the trees were not expecting snow in that month or whatever. So they were used to doing fall later. So are the falls getting later, or is that not yet?
Oh, yeah. Falls are definitely getting later. Good, maybe also good news is, trees aren't, we get 14 inches of rain here a year. We get 14 inches of total water a year here. We're basically in the high desert. We're over 800 miles away from the nearest big body of water. And I say that because trees are not really normal, or they're human grown here. So snapping tree limbs as is already a weird thing. If they're not snapping, it's just as human impacted, if that makes sense. But falls are definitely getting later. And again, to me, the time of year where you feel it, and I say this on air, I'm million times over till I'm blue in the face, is that is where your September and October is now August 2.0, and sometimes August 3.0. We just had our second hottest October on record, our hottest September on record, and that's where you're seeing the impact of warming climate, I think, here pretty unequivocally here in Colorado. You won't get much pushback on that.
So the vegetation is adapting by becoming later, right?
Yeah.
I think the trees know more than we think. Because, for example, when it's September and it's hot, they're gonna be green. But when it's cold, they will say, okay, it's time to change. So every year is different. Every year is not gonna be the same. So I think they know more than we think. So they are ready for everything, I think.
Thank you. This is awesome, you guys. Quite a few years ago, I was seeing Mike Nelson talk about climate change when it seemed pretty uncool to talk about it, and made me, somewhat fear for his life even. How long ago did each of you start introducing climate change, and what was the discussion in the boardroom like to allow that to happen? And do you still today receive much pushback on the whole topic as it unfolds?
Están preguntando si cómo hablamos sobre eso como como una panels.
What last session?
We're on the last question. We're answering the last question.
Okay.
I think we have to keep in mind, if they're afraid, we have to be clear of everything that we have to explain to them. If they ask you, you have to have their answer. They are gonna talk about it in school, anywhere. They are gonna be scared maybe, maybe not. Maybe they have a lot of questions. So it's when they are ready to talk about it. So we don't know when they are ready to talk about it. So if they have the question, we have to try to explain to them in the best way.
I'll quickly say that I think we owe Mike Nelson, that generation, quite a bit, because they made it normal for us to talk about it, and I don't get a ton of pushback in my newsroom or wherever talking about it, because I think it's now accepted, and that's because of, I don't mean that generation that's obviously above us, and I'm very grateful, and Mike really is well known across the country for being a pioneer in that realm.
Well, thank you so much for coming here today and answering all our questions.
Today we are honored to have a keynote speaker from Dark Skies, Colorado. He's going to talk about the importance of reducing light pollution, which is kind of a big issue and I wasn't fully informed about. I'm looking forward to hearing more about. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to John Garvey of Dark Skies, Colorado.
Thanks. One winter day in early 2013, a day kind of like this one, I was on a walk in the countryside and I noticed something that might sound trivial today, but in the moment it was so moving I knew that I was going to remember it for the rest of my life. It was a cold Saturday morning just outside of Golden, Colorado, with very little traffic or breeze. It was deliciously quiet. If you live in a house with multiple children and dogs, then you can appreciate what I mean by deliciously quiet. So, a flock of geese approached, and it would have been easy not to notice because they too were silent. But as they passed overhead, I heard something I'd never noticed before. It was the whistling of their wingtips cutting through the cold air. I was far more entertained by this than I suppose a normal person would be. I watched them in silence as they passed until they were nearly out of sight. And you know, I didn't realize this was a thing. It's a minor thing, but it's something that had happened hundreds of times before. It really floored me that I had not noticed this in the hundreds of times in my life that this has happened before. So the next day, I told my girlfriend about this, and I don't think it was so much what I described as the way that I said it, like a wide-eyed religious convert, that prompted her basically good-natured response. Johnny, you're on drugs. So I have to admit that not that I was on drugs, but I admit that I did kind of think maybe I was a smidge crazy, and that I had just imagined this, and I was vaguely preoccupied about it for the rest of the week. On the following Saturday, I was on a walk in Wash Park, and the same thing happened. A flock of geese passed overhead, and I listened raptly this time, and I heard it again. And I was like, aha, I'm not crazy. I love thinking about that moment outside of Golden because it makes me think of how much beauty there is hidden in plain sight and how easy it is to take things for granted. The crunching of leaves under your feet, the love of your pets, access to potable drinking water, and of course the health and resilience of the natural environment. One thing that I felt that I was able to take for granted growing up was the sight of the Milky Way. Can I see by a show of hands how many of you have seen the Milky Way within the last year? That's a lot. That's more than I expected. How about the last 5 years? The first time I remember seeing the Milky Way, I was 5 or 6 years old. I was standing in my backyard in Wichita, Kansas, which at the time was a town of around 300,000 people. And that's 30 times the size of the light-polluted town that I now live in outside of Fort Collins. I was standing there with my mom, and Mom pointed and said, "Look, Johnny, it's the Milky Way." And I was young enough to innocently ask, "Is it made out of milk?" Now, standing in that exact spot today, I don't think it's much of an exaggeration to say that it basically looks like a yellowish gray veil, an anemic yellow-gray veil with Orion's belt and a few other stars poking through. What light pollution means for the experience of childhood and for our cultural heritage is a topic that merits its own discussion. But I mention this to really impress upon you how much we've altered this one facet of our natural environment in such a short time. It's really dramatic. And actually, most of the loss of our night sky, I think, it's really accelerated within the last 15 years. The story I told you about my childhood was roughly 35 years ago. I still think you would have had a pretty good view 20 years ago or maybe 15 years ago. And I'll talk about why it's gotten so much worse, but also what you can do about it. And the fact is, compared to so many other things that we face, it's a pretty easy win. This is a picture taken by a colleague of mine in El Paso County. So he has access to, he's an astrophotographer, and he has access to land out there And it's basically in the middle of nowhere. A few months ago, this facility installed new lighting. And we don't really know who owns it. It's kind of dubious, possibly on purpose, but I think it's a subsidiary of Phillips 66. They are 1.4 miles away from where he was as the crow flies, and he was able to see his own shadow on the ground from the lighting from this facility 1.4 miles away. The reason, at least a big part of the reason that we have situations like this that are arising, and a big part of the reason for the acceleration of light pollution is called the Jevons paradox. And I'm going to give you kind of a dumbed down version of it because I'm not an engineer, and like if there's any engineers in this room that know what it is, they're like, don't pick on me. But the Jevons paradox basically states that increased efficiency in the use of a resource often leads to increased consumption of that resource because the lower cost associated with it, it removes like the economic incentives that would normally prevent overuse and misuse of it. Whenever we encourage the adoption of LEDs or any kind of technology that relates to efficiency, we need to think about this because they have such a long life cycle and they're so cheap to operate that it's just really easy to leave them on all night and all day and to install larger and brighter light fixtures on your facility, in your home. And sometimes, if you don't think about it holistically, there are some cases where well-intentioned policies can have this really harmful unintended consequence of increasing light pollution, sometimes drastically increasing it. It's like killing elephants to save dolphins. Natural cycles of light and darkness should be considered, I think, one key dimension of atmospheric health. When you think about the atmosphere and the functions that it serves, it's there to sustain and nurture life. And it's a conduit for migration and pollination, and it's a conduit for light. So natural cycles of light and darkness play a huge role in, every dimension of animal behavior, probably, and every dimension of wildlife conservation and environmental conservation. 80% of migratory birds travel by night, and they rely on natural cycles of light and darkness to navigate successfully. Light pollution kills millions of migratory birds a year, directly by kind of steering them into buildings, and indirectly through like just exhaustion, depleting their energy reserves as they navigate off course and circle around light intensive areas. Light pollution also plays a strong role, although I don't know how well understood this is, in the decline in insects around the world, and especially in North America and Europe. So it's indirectly affecting birds through depleting their food supply. Also, light pollution, so insects, mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and even plant life take cues from the natural rhythms of day and night. This influences growth, hunting, pollination, foraging, and mating. I touched on this already. one thing that gets lost in the discussion about light pollution and dark sky conservation, because this has historically been a cause that has attracted the most attention from the astronomical community and from conservationists because of its effects on birds. But it's really become clear, I think, in the last 10 years that this is a major public health issue, and this is something that affects everybody's quality of life. Going back at least to the early 2000s, there's been a lot of data coming out linking and showing the relationship between light pollution and breast cancer risk, light pollution and prostate cancer, low birth weight, insomnia, of course, diabetes and obesity, and some other chronic illnesses. Now, the clearest reason for this is melatonin suppression. When you are exposed to bright lights, and particularly blue spectrum light in the evening, then that can cause melatonin suppression, which basically, if you look at this, so color temperature is measured in Kelvin, and lower Kelvin lighting is warmer, and higher Kelvin lighting is like cooler. And so, you know, when you think about like in the middle of the day, you're going to be on the higher end of the spectrum. In the evening, it's going to be on the lower end of the spectrum, and that basically signals your body or your brain to release melatonin, which helps you get to sleep and helps you get good, healthy, restorative sleep. Basically, when you are exposed to a lot of artificial light late in the evening, then your brain thinks that it's 11:30 in the morning. And even if you are able to get to sleep easily and sleep throughout the night, then you're likely to get less restful sleep because it messes with your sleep architecture. In 2016, the American Medical Association issued guidance on outdoor lighting and street lighting that was largely ignored. But one of the things that they stated, they pushed for like an overall reduction in light pollution, especially glare, like harsh direct lighting and backlighting. But then they also suggested that street lighting be capped at 3,000 Kelvin, and ideally 2,700 Kelvin is where you want your outdoor lighting to be, and lighting in areas of your own home where you're spending a lot of time in the evenings too. Yes, so when you're shopping for light bulbs or light fixtures, don't forget Kelvin. From a public health standpoint, this is probably the most important of the guidelines for night sky conservation too, but it's also another thing about that cool spectrum light is that it scatters in the atmosphere a lot more effectively than warmer color spectrum light, and it scatters, it's a short wavelength light, so it scatters differently within the human eye and out on the streets and in natural areas. One thing about this whole topic that I would want to make sure that I mention is we waste a tremendous amount of energy beaming light up into the sky, into watersheds and undeveloped fields and our neighbors' bedroom windows. And I don't know, you know, like there's probably different, this mic is glitching. There's different estimates, I'm sure, of the like carbon impact of that. So light pollution, of course, contributes to climate change directly, but that's complicated again by the Jevons paradox and the affordability of LED lighting. And again, I'm not anti-LED. There's just very easy to misuse and abuse and even weaponize. When I think of lighting, when I think of light pollution and night sky conservation and the natural environment, I think of the ways that it exacerbates the effects of climate change more than I think about the ways that it actually contributes to climate change. And then I think about it, you know, it's also its own beast. These things, you see these things all over the place. I don't think there's anywhere, like no municipality that has any lighting ordinances whatsoever allows these, and you see them all over the place. And I'll tell you, like from a public safety standpoint, if somebody's standing between you and one of these, you can't see their face, you can't read their body language, you can't tell if they have, you might not be able to tell if they have their hands in their pockets. The trade-off, the supposed trade-off between dark sky practices and public safety is a myth and a misunderstanding. We're not dark ground Colorado, and I recognize that artificial light at night, to the extent that it serves comfort and safety, is a good thing, but it doesn't benefit anybody's security to beam light horizontally or upward into the sky. Thanks. So another thing is, if you own a small piece of commercial property and you're really gung-ho about your outdoor lighting, then it can have an effect on sky quality miles away. Like a little kid 3 miles away from your facility can be looking up at the sky and seeing like 5 or 10% fewer stars because of something that's happening 3 miles away. Going back to the example from El Paso County, and this, you know, Colorado has 64 counties and hundreds of municipalities. I think it can be a lot of work to be on a town council or to be a county commissioner. Like, they don't all have lighting ordinances, and they don't all have up-to-date lighting ordinances. And I don't think, there's things that you just don't anticipate. Like, you shouldn't need to have a law that says you can't shine a light into somebody's bedroom window for 1.5 miles away. But that's basically where we are. Some of the things that would be nice to see is, by the way, the legislature passed House Bill 1382 in 2022, which provided funding for our mentor program, and our dark skies specialists provide technical assistance and consulting to municipalities and parks that are pursuing dark sky certification. It's been super productive. We have like 34 places in the pipeline now. Last year we certified, last year we added 3 communities to, we helped 3 communities achieve dark sky certification, and that was Browns Canyon National Monument, Gunnison Gorge National Conservation, and the town of Paonia. And I think we're basically, and we're just getting warmed up. Colorado has 18 certified dark sky places. That's almost more than any other state in the country. And we have 34 in the pipeline. It's been a really constructive partnership with the Colorado Tourism Office, who provides us funding for this. So yes, we're very small and we have a long way to go statewide, but we're killing it. It would be nice to have an expectation established by statewide legislation with a zoned approach to maintaining overall sky quality. And it would be nice to have recognition that light trespass is a form of trespassing. It is and I think it violates, like, some of the pushback you sometimes get against dark sky ordinances is property rights. But it is really a property right issue. Like, you shouldn't have somebody shining a light into your bedroom window from 1.4 miles away or from any distance. So I wish that we would recognize that that is a form of trespassing, and people should have recourse to the law if that's happening. It would also be nice to have overhangs, calculated overhangs on LED billboards and moratoriums on them, and I wish that we just wouldn't permit them because they're horrible for sky quality. A non-environmental reason why this is so important is called cosmic insignificance therapy. We all need to feel wonder, and stargazing fits that need nicely. It diminishes the weight of political squabbles and social comparison and unopened work emails so much. When you're looking at the pristine night sky, it's impossible to catastrophize over an unopened invoice or something you saw on social media, or even an election, or even an awkward encounter with an ex, or even a public speaking engagement that you don't feel fully prepared for. When you're looking up at the night sky, you're also struck by the realization that that is not going to fall on me. There's no way that thing is actually going to fall on me. So if you fail to provide a timely response to an email, or botch a work presentation, or say something stupid on a date, it's still going to be there, benign, beautiful, and totally indifferent to the ephemeral things that keep us up at night. You should go to a stargazing festival if you haven't been to one, because when you're looking at a little tiny pinpoint of light 3,000 light years away, and someone who knows what they're talking about says that is the size of 10 suns, it really puts like that snarky email from Cal in perspective. It's just, the universe is just an inconceivably giant place. And I use trivial examples about our hangups because that's easy to do. It's hard to be a human, and like your kids get bullied and you lose people you love. But I think the sense of scale still gives you, it still helps, it gets you out of the little fishbowl of anxiety, of rumination, where you're just thinking the same thoughts, like over and over and over and over again. We all do that sometimes, and nothing breaks you out of that like an inconceivably vast cosmos. And that the paradox of cosmic insignificance therapy is that while other people in your life, or the weight of the world's problems, or the 24/7 news cycle can make you feel small in a helpless way, looking at the cosmos makes you feel small in a liberating way. And even while it puts the weight of your own worries in perspective, it makes your own life and your relationships feel all the more precious. And it makes you feel all the more determined, I think, not to waste the opportunities that have been given to you. Each year, light pollution is increasing by 7 to 10%. Go outside tonight, if it's not overcast, or sometime soon. Leave your phone inside, find a comparatively dark spot, and give your eyes a couple of minutes to adjust. And look up at the stars. You'll be seeing 7 to 10% fewer stars than you were able to see 1 year ago. And obviously that depends, like give or take, based on where exactly you are. But I want you to think about this. Think about how you'd feel if pikas or house finches or meadowlarks or Colorado's elk population was declining at 7 to 10% a year, I would be royally freaked out by it. But also think about how nice it would be if you could fix that problem at the flip of a switch. It doesn't have to be this way. This is dang, the name of the town is escaping me. But Flagstaff, yep. So again, we're dark sky Colorado, we're not dark ground Colorado. Compared to other problems of the scale and consequence of light pollution, this is really an easy win. It doesn't require generations of stewardship to restore the nighttime habitat the way it might after like an oil spill or something. And I think in the world we're living in today, we need small wins and we need easy wins from time to time. The first generation of Americans to grow up without the stars is now coming of age. But 10 to 15 years from now, kids growing up in Aurora, Wash Park, Sunnyside, Fort Collins, Grand Junction, Colorado Springs, and elsewhere could be looking at the Milky Way from their own backyard. Last summer, I was camping with a couple of other families in Rocky Mountain National Park, and I was with 4 kids, my kids, aged ranging in age from 8 to 12, when they got to see the Milky Way for the first time. One thing that's more beautiful even than looking at the Milky Way is being with kids when they're seeing it for the first time. And it's impossible to feel cynical when you're looking at the Milky Way, you know? Nobody's looking at the Milky Way thinking about their political party identity. A generation that grows up with a view of the night sky is going to be far less cynical because of it. Dark sky restoration is an achievable and beautiful vision for the near future. Thank you.
Oh, you got it. Thanks.
Thank you, John. That was fantastic. Like you said, it's such an easy fix. This is something we can do literally today. Can we get another round of applause for John? Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome, good afternoon. I'm glad to see you all here. My name is Jack Fritzinger. I'm the CEO of JF Strategies, a strategic advisory firm that is supporting climate innovation from kind of lab stage and seed up through scale and deployment. And I'm joined today by Tamara George from RMI, who recently authored a detailed report on the topic of financing building decarbonization. So we're here today to talk about that and many other things related to building decarb. So Tamara, thanks so much for joining us. Can we get a round of applause for her? Okay. Tamara is a manager on RMI's Carbon-Free Buildings team, where her focus is on financial strategies for building decarbonization and engagement with financial institutions to achieve a low-carbon built environment. So first, Tamara, I'd love if you can tell us a little bit more about your background and also a little bit about RMI for folks in the room who might not be familiar. What is RMI? How does your team fit within that?
Yeah, sounds good. So RMI, formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute, is based in Basalt, Colorado originally, also Boulder, Washington, D.C., New York, Oakland, California, and we have offices in India, China, and a distributed team in Europe. And we're working in Nigeria as well. RMI does all things clean energy. So we have a variety of different teams focusing on different aspects of the energy transition. I sit on the buildings team. We have Center for Climate Aligned Finance, which is my former team. We have the industry team, electricity team, and they all have their own niches. They're pretty self-explanatory. We have about 700 people globally. We're largely remote. In terms of my background, I mostly have background in economics and finance. So I sit on the buildings team. to help a lot of very knowledgeable engineers figure out how to finance the energy transition. I've worked in macro research before. I have a degree in policy and in economics, and I've been with RMI for almost 6 years.
Amazing.
You said you're in green energy or something like that. What does RMI do besides have a lot of people in a lot of places?
We do research, we do analysis, we publish a lot of reports with groundbreaking research, we do consulting, we work with governments, work with private companies. On the finance side, we help banks decarbonize their portfolios. We have initiatives like the Mission Possible Partnership. Well, we try to figure out how do you get rid of carbon in hard-to-abate sectors like aluminum or real estate, which is connected to my work, or steel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were a construction company.
Tough to put your finger on it because RMI is involved in so many things, from the
Right.
research and consulting side across all of these different sectors and pieces of climate. So let's zero in on one of those sectors, the building decarbonization space. What is building decarb? What does it look like? And can you talk a little bit about why it matters that we're talking about decarbonizing buildings?
Yeah, so buildings globally hold about close to 50% of carbon, 40-something%. I think 47 was the latest I saw from IECC. In the United States, about 23%, according to the research that we conducted a couple of years ago. So it's big, and we need to address it if we're going to be net zero. Our federal national goal of net zero still stands by 2050. You can't do that without addressing buildings. Building decarb refers to probably pretty self-explanatory, but electrification, improving the building envelope. That can mean insulation, can mean changing your windows. It refers to anything that lowers the carbon footprint of your home.
Great. And then now on the financing side, because some of these costs can be borne by a homeowner, for example, changing light bulbs to something that's more energy efficient. And some of these costs are huge and are really difficult for a homeowner to take on or for a commercial enterprise to front. And so what do some of the financing structures look like for building decarb?
Yeah, so that really, I'm going to back up and tell you a little bit about the setup of this research to kind of get into that, because it very much depends about the segment that you're talking about and the ownership structure. So the reason the research that we undertook was understanding where carbon in buildings actually is. So we all know that buildings have a lot of carbon, that they use a lot of electricity and a lot of fossil fuels, but we don't really know whether buildings, like, where is the majority of that carbon? Is it residential buildings that we all live in? Is it massive data centers? Like, what is it? Where is it? So we took a new data set from NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab, that came out in 2021, I think, that kind of shows the footprint of electricity and fossil fuels across buildings in the United States. They have a representative sample. So built a carbon model from that and extrapolated to figure out where this carbon is. So what it boiled down to is that about half of building carbon in the United States is in single-family homes. Close to 40% is in commercial properties, and the rest is in multifamily. And when you look into it deeper, so if you read the news and you follow building decarb in any way, you will see a lot of attention on things like Class A office buildings in New York. Or, Empire State Building underwent a massive renovation. That's great, don't get me wrong, but it turns out that most of the carbon in commercial buildings is actually in medium and small sized buildings, in things like restaurants and things like strip malls. So when you dig down a level deeper, it's not the usual suspects. While Class A offices have been renovated extensively and they have a pretty good carbon footprint at this point, it's not necessarily where we should keep focusing our attention. So to your question on financing, I think it very much depends like where we're at in that spectrum. Ownership is also very different. So if we look at single family homes, it's, everybody who lives in the United States, like everybody owns their home. Institutional ownership is not that high. Again, back to the news, there's a lot of rumbling about institutional investors buying up residential homes, but at the time of this research, it was actually still below, I think, 1% or 2%. of institutional ownership of residential. So really, if you're trying to influence the single family sector, you have one of two ways. You go after every homeowner, which is very difficult, or you go after the government-sponsored enterprises that hold about half of debt in single-family residential. But then if you talk about commercial, then it's different. About half of commercial is privately held, and that's very hard to kind of ascertain or go after, if you will. But the rest of it is financed by private banks, or a lot of it is financed by private banks. So there's stuff you can do about that. And then, we can talk about stacking, about federal support programs, about what states can do, and how you put those different resources together. But again, depends on where you want your impact to be.
Why don't we start, for illustrative purposes, closest to home with these single-family residences. What are some of the ways in which you can influence policy and flows of finance to help building decarbonization happen at the single-family level?
Yeah, so this research, granted, was very kind of high level, taking stock of the whole system. And in that sense, if you look at single family and you look at levers of influence, like where you can actually make an impact, it makes sense to go to policy there because government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae, hold half of mortgage debt, right? So if they had a change in the way that they underwrite mortgages, if they made a requirement that, for example, any mortgage that, and GSEs, for people who are not familiar, usually are their secondary market for mortgages. So usually a bank will underwrite the mortgage, like, I don't know, it can be a local one or it can be JP Morgan Chase, and then Freddie and Fannie will buy it and back it. So a lot of banks that underwrite mortgages kind of count on that backing from the federal government. And if you have Freddie and Fannie change the rules of what they underwrite, that would automatically trickle down and change the way that most mortgages in the United States are underwritten. And it's a huge lever of influence, but the GSEs are also notoriously hard to amend rules. It's kind of difficult to figure out where exactly to engage. So by far, that is the biggest, most obvious kind of lever to pull, but it has its own difficulties. And then, of course, each homeowner can do what they can.
Can you give an example of what a rule change might look like if Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were to make an update?
Yeah, so you could change, for example, you could require that every home that is being sold has to have an energy assessment. You could require that you put the results from the energy assessment onto a schedule of replacement. So you could say, this house is entirely gas run, but over the next 20 years, as things like kind of fall apart, you don't even have to proactively do it, but when your gas boiler kind of is done, you replace it with a heat pump. And that's a similar lever in private institutions too. When banks do their due diligence, they usually assume like-for-like replacement. They have this thing called the replacement reserves, which they hold, that the homeowner can tap for necessary replacements, but they don't make a provision for green replacements, which are also usually more expensive, and it would be important to kind of allow that to be used, but it's not currently. So there are certain things you could tweak, but again, you need to find the right person to engage, the right leverage pool.
So we've been talking a little bit about using policy levers at the single family level to influence how building decarbonization happens there. I'm curious, does it look similar at the commercial level, and who are the players involved there? How do you influence building decarb at commercial building level?
Yeah, so very high level. Again, by segment it would differ, right, depending on ownership. About half is private, as we mentioned, but about, I think it was 15% of all commercial debt is held by the 9 largest banks in the United States. So if you had your Wells Fargo and JP Morgan and Bank of America and the rest of them kind of institute different rules for underwriting, I think that could change the picture for a lot of them. Of course, you have some tricky segments like mom and pop restaurants where it's a little harder. You have strip malls where you usually have a triple net lease, and it's really hard to figure out who should be responsible for improvements. Or if, you know, a nail salon in a strip mall wants to do an improvement, that's great, but then who's responsible for the hallway? Or for, you know, the restaurant next door that's fuming all over the place and you're trying to run a mini split in the nail salon. So some of them get pretty tricky, but I'd say on the commercial side, private financial institutions have a lot more to do than on the single family side.
Got it. So let's say you're a single family homeowner or you're a business owner with a commercial building. Policies have changed. Now your underwriter is essentially requiring you to do building upgrades to decarbonize over the course of 20, 30 years. And so you're looking at what your options are and the costs associated with doing those upgrades, and probably wondering, how am I possibly going to pay for this stuff?
Yep.
And so there have been a slate of government programs and local programs that are helping folks to do that. Can you talk a little bit about what that ecosystem looks like of incentives and other financing options?
Yeah, so part of what we're working on is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed 2 years ago. The GGRF portion is $27 billion. It's split into multiple awards. Long story short, the IRA as a whole has a lot of different tax incentives and rebates that aim to help consumers with just that afford these upgrades that are still quite expensive. So the idea is that you can combine some of those federal tax rebates. Some are point of sale, some of the discounts. So you can go, I don't know, purchase an EV or want to upgrade your home, you're buying a heat pump. Some of them are point of sale, which is the seller agrees to take on that process of, I will apply to the federal government, wait for a rebate, but I will give you a discount right now. So you as a consumer can just say, whew, I don't have to cash out $20,000, I can cash out, I don't know, 12. And then state programs also exist. Excel has some rebates. For residential, I think they just updated them from what I heard downstairs on January 1st. And then finally, like, when you stack all of those incentives, you see like what you actually owe and how much more, or is it even more than like-for-like replacement.
Are you finding that those systems are relatively easy to navigate for the single-family homeowners and commercial building owners?
Oh,
or
God, no, they're not.
Yeah.
No, I think that's one of the things that I would say I would love to see in this space. I mean, I work in this field, right? Like I do this stuff, and it's hard for me to understand how to decarbonize my home. So you know something's wrong there.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It's an opaque system. It's really hard to tell, especially if it's a rebate, exactly how much it's going to be, when you get which piece of it. As a consumer, as somebody who needs to, pay for this out of their checking account, it's quite difficult to figure out when comes what piece and how exactly you apply. Are you eligible? Is it income dependent? Is it not income dependent? Like, what am I doing? So I'd say there's a lot of room for improvement in making this accessible for homeowners, like the point of sale rebates. I think it's much easier for a person, obviously, to know what they owe, pay what they owe, and be done with it, than wait for the IRS for a year to figure out what they can get back.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because we didn't talk about this one, but I heard the governor downstairs mention an interesting financing idea that I hadn't heard of before, which is using homeowners' future energy savings to finance the upfront purchase of building decarb systems. Do you know about that? Can you share a little bit more about what he's thinking there and how that might look?
I think what he was referring to is a version of a tariff on bill. Don't quote me if I'm misunderstanding what he said. I might be. But I think it's a version of getting a discount on or paying for an energy upgrade over time through your utility bill. And the idea is that increase for the capital cost would be offset by the energy savings, or largely offset by the energy savings of the improvement. So it makes it more affordable for people to do it over time, but you need regulatory support for that. You need to pass it through. It needs to be available in the state for somebody to use it.
Got it. So one of the things, as someone who works with a lot of startups in the climate space, is I'm always thinking about new innovations in this space. And it hasn't been that long that we have had a bunch of new innovations in heat pumps and in ways of doing water heating and cooling, and like a bunch of new systems and technologies that can dramatically reduce the carbon emissions of our buildings. But the flip side of that is these technologies are newer, and so they tend to be more expensive, and they're manufactured at smaller scale than our traditional systems. So where does building decarb financing solutions and the startup innovation ecosystem, where do those two meet and how do they help each other?
I mean, that's a really good question. I'd say that, as you said, a lot of these technologies have been around for a little bit, right? So we know about heat pumps. We know that it's proven technology. We know that it's harder in cold climates. You have cold climate heat pumps. You have warmer climates where it's much easier, and therefore the penetration is already much higher in southern states than it is in Michigan and Minnesota. And I'd say that there's a lot of space to make them cheaper and to make them faster to install. There's a lot, like I see a lot of space for innovation in things that are not as attractive. So everybody wants to be the next guy who makes the perfect mini split,
The sexy
right?
startup
Exactly,
new technology.
exactly. You're
yeah.
the guy who makes the super easy heat pump. But nobody really necessarily wants to improve the process or necessarily thinks about the less attractive parts of the story, which is how do you make the consumer to supplier link stronger? How do you make things easier for the consumer? How do you increase consumer education? What do you do about workforce development? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't seen a contractor recently who even knew what I was talking about when I mentioned a heat pump. And I live in Boulder, Colorado. So there's lots of areas that are not as sexy, but are really necessary to make the system gel, because a lot of the technology is there. Where even embodied carbon is becoming more mainstream. We have a ton of, there's a really cool magazine I saw downstairs that talks about hempcrete, and some of these materials that I'm not an expert on, but that are becoming more mainstream. People can actually use them, and investors are quickly figuring out how some of these technologies actually pay off for them, because the materials are cheaper, and a lot of the embodied carbon strategies are about reducing the amount of material you use. It's not necessarily all just in the red when you talk about finance either.
I think this is such an interesting topic because there are so many different ways that you can slice it. And one of the things that really opened my eyes in your report is looking at where are the biggest impact opportunities within the space. And it's not always where you would think. Often you hear about building new green buildings, and this is a passive house or something like that. Can you speak a little bit to the building stock and how we should be thinking about retrofitting existing buildings as opposed to new construction?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. When you talk about green buildings, you talk about green construction, really. So a lot of the time you will hear people think about, as I mentioned a second ago, embodied carbon, like which new materials can we use when we erect new buildings? But the truth is, the flow to stock ratio is staggeringly small. So the new addition of new building stock in the US is below 1% relative to the flow if you look at just the market cap. So really the vast majority of the buildings that make up the carbon and that need to be quote unquote fixed are existing buildings. So if you look around you, virtually everything you see will still be standing at least until 2050 or beyond. So especially if you think about climate goals in 2050 or before, you have to think about retrofits, because that's the 99% of carbon that we're even talking about. So that's one kind of unpopular thing to say. And yeah, it's much harder to get people to think about retrofits because you get into these lengthy discussions about like financing, and doesn't it just pay off more to erect a new green building? But then what are you going to do with all the emissions that are currently there? Then you get into the conversation about decarbonizing the grid, because a lot of these segments use more electricity than fossil fuels, depending on what we're talking about. The majority of commercial buildings use mostly electricity, so then that becomes connected to the whole electricity decarb conversation. And a lot of these topics are not really easily separable from one another.
Yeah, it's so interconnected. Let's put aside the new builds for a second and focus on this biggest piece of the puzzle, these retrofits. You alluded at the beginning to a few ways in which you can decarbonize these areas, whether it's better insulation, windows, and electricity usage. Are there certain areas there that are much higher impact than others, and where should we be focusing our time and attention?
Yeah, so some of them were interesting to me when I first learned about them as a finance and not necessarily just building person. That things like replacing your windows for a higher grade, like less drafty ones, can reduce your electricity usage by a lot, depending on how bad your current situation is in your house. Things like improving your roof or putting like reflective coating on the outside of your building, how much sunlight you can reflect away, and then you don't need as much cooling as you used to in the summer. Or putting in better insulation, things that are not necessarily extremely expensive, but can add up to a lot over time. So those are the kind of smaller improvements you can think about. And then you have the obvious ones that everybody talks about, which is install a heat pump, get rid of all of your gas appliances, do not use a gas stove, things like that. So I guess you can look at it both ways depending on what your budget is.
Are there any generalized things that we can look at as like, in general, targeting this part of your electric usage or this part of your installation is a great place to start when you're getting into this journey? Or is it truly on a building by building basis and an energy audit or something like that is the way to identify the biggest impacts?
Yeah, I'd say it is. You really need to figure out where your house stands, because some houses, especially newer ones, have excellent insulation, fantastic windows, and don't really have as big of a carbon footprint, maybe especially if they were built to a passive house standard, which is very few buildings, or any sort of kind of climate conscious way. And then you have buildings like the one I live in, which was built in 1979 and has a gas boiler that will survive the apocalypse if left alone. So it really depends where you live. And I think that's where my contractor bit, I'm not going to get on my soapbox, but comes in, which is you need someone to actually look at your house and tell you what your options are. Because especially as an average homeowner, you just don't know. You don't even know that your insulation may need to be replaced. I didn't know that. I work in climate change. So once you start learning about these things, you understand how they impact your budget and how, like, what you can do. Like, it doesn't have to be just a heat pump.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about financing some of those solutions like the heat pumps, but there are solutions out there for your energy audit as well to help make that more tangible, more actionable for you and more accessible.
Yeah.
I've got one last question for you, and then I want to open it up to our audience here, and that is around where are the big blank spaces that are still left in this space? What are the opportunities that you see for big improvements over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so the way that I see this research and this report is kind of attacking one gap in the puzzle that we saw, which is just the lack of relevant data that builds the baseline, right? But there's so much you can do to build on that, and especially to pull the picture together. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of I don't want to say issue, I think it's great that everybody tries to fill in the gaps that they can, but oftentimes it's hard to bring it all in. Like, how do you think about federal incentives and state incentives and the financing piece and the private finance, and then building technology and energy audits and assessments, and who's going to pay for those? Is that the government's job or is it the homeowner's job? Then consumer education, workforce development. Like, these are all integral pieces of the puzzle, and it's hard to kind of have a clear picture in your mind of everything that needs to work to really make it work, and to proliferate these technologies. So I see a lot of kind of blank space there on all of these topics that I mentioned. One that I wish we had time and budget for, but we didn't, is a cost analysis, which is like, okay, when it really comes down to it, state by state or just federally on average, how affordable is this for an average homeowner? Mm-hmm. What are we looking at? Are we looking at an average cost of $20K or $120K? How does that match with different contractors? Like, what is the availability of contractor knowledge right now? Where is it thinnest? What can we do? So, embodied carbon, how do you tie that into the picture? So yeah, lots more to do, but this was just kind of an attempt to build out the foundation a little bit.
And super helpful. I highly encourage you all to take a look at this report from RMI. It's detailed, it's got a lot of fantastic information in there. We could keep going for a very long time, but I know we've got an amazing audience here who wants to ask questions as well, so we'll open it up to you all.
Yeah, so you mentioned retrofits being a big piece of the puzzle, and you're right, there are tons and tons of rebates to put in a heat pump. I understand from the contractors I work with who put in DC pumps that there's a big piece of that puzzle that's missing, which is most of these retrofits require the electric paneling on the household be upgraded, and this is often where the ball's getting dropped. So my question is, how is there still such a big blind side right here? If we know that we have to support them in buying this heat pump, how are we also not supporting them in doing the electric panel upgrades?
No, I think that's a very good point, and it goes back to my contractor education piece. I think that if you have a contractor that fully understands all the pieces that are connected, if you want an EV charger, well, your panel won't support that, or hey, your panel is actually split between you and the neighbors, so you don't have 240, you actually have 120 that won't support your electricity need plus your electric car, and then working with an electrician to help you figure that out, I think definitely fits into the missing education piece that I see. Not just on the contractor side, I'm not trying to lay blame on them or anything like that, but I think there's an ecosystem development part there that's missing. And it's not just any one contractor, electrician, it's about, like, do you need to have a shop that kind of has all of these guys together to make it work? Or do you just need to have a really educated contractor who knows who to call and tell you, like, look, as a homeowner, you're looking at this set of upgrades, like you don't have ducts, you need to install that, this guy can do it for you, or this type of expert. You need an electrician for the panel, you need this guy to bring you the actual heat pump, like actually gives you a full picture of what you need to pay for and who you need to call.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just, I mean, we know a lot more just from EVs about how complicated the electrical stuff is. It's not as there are two spaces for two breakers in the panel. It's the service line got enough, and can the electrical company support you getting 200 amps instead of 150 amps to your house? It can get very difficult to understand what something will cost and how long it will take, and what all the requirements are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even down to weird, dumb things. When we put in my EV charger, it needed little clamp-on things so that it could get screwed in, and my electrician didn't know what they needed.
Yeah, I mean, we still had Federal Pacific panel, which is a hazard and is now prohibited by state code. We had to urgently replace it because all of a sudden we're out of compliance, and the electrician was very confused about the whole business. And then all of a sudden he was like, well, this can no longer support an EV. I was like, well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
We had a question in the back, and then we'll come to you in the middle.
I'm going to say on that topic, I do some engineering for heat pumps, and probably just good enough to be dangerous so far. These are so new and evolving and crazy. But we might be running into this perfect is the enemy of the good situation. If I'm trying to eliminate gas completely, now the heat pump's not a problem because it just replaces an air conditioner, which is already the same equivalent load on the panel, and probably were designed for that for most people these days, or if they want air conditioning, they're going to do it anyway. But if I have to do electric backup heat for the super cold days to get rid of the gas completely, that's the part that kills me on the panel. So then I'm like, let's keep the gas for backup. It's just a few days. It's very minimal gas. That way we get
Exactly.
Compounding the whole problem and making it too expensive.
I agree. I'm a big fan of stepwise process. Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. If all you can do is replace your gas cook stove with an induction one, by all means do it. If you can't have a heat pump, replace your insulation. Like, whatever you can. And I think over time, if you get to a heat pump and 100% clean energy, fantastic. But if not, you've done what you could.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback on your question, I think Denver is looking at supporting electric panel upgrades from their rebate program if they haven't already, at least in some of their equity priority projects and things like that. But I have my own question sort of about the general finance industry. I've got someone I know that's helping decommission coal plants from a finance perspective, and they were planned like probably 2005, right before fracking sort of killed coal along with other entities here, club advocacy, all that. And it's interesting because it's like, oh, had they thought about this 5 years later, they probably wouldn't have built the coal plants, and here they are doing stranded assets. We see JP Morgan financing expanded fossil fuel infrastructure, and I'm just like, the finance people starting to get that they're building future stranded assets, and that's a huge problem. I think the insurance industry is sort of a canary in the coal mine for the finance people, but just sort of curious how that landscape's starting to shift. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned it. That's another report I co-authored a couple of years ago about closing coal plants and financial mechanisms for closing coal plants. Stranded assets are a real problem. I honestly am incredulous that these guys are still financing coal, but they are. They truly are. I think you start looking at amortization schedules, like what sort of money are we thinking about? And one thing that they can try and do is repurpose, right? So if it's a coal plant, it's brand new, see what else you can use it for. See if you can use it for clean energy or use it for something else that's less carbon than coal, which is a pretty low bar, and try to recover some of those assets so they're not totally stranded. But yeah, to your question, I think a lot of bankers, there's some good ones. There really are people who truly care and want to move the needle and think about different financing mechanisms to make it happen. European banks are a pretty good example. So on the building side, I know of a good example from the Netherlands, ING, which also has branches here. They have this interesting financing mechanism that targets poorly performing buildings. So in the United States, it's the opposite. You target the good guys, right? You build a green building, I give you really good terms on your loan. There, they actually target the bad guys. Like if a building, especially in Europe, where most buildings are ancient and are going to stand there for another 300 years, you try to retrofit the building and you give the person, the developer, whoever's homeowner, you give them a loan with very favorable terms contingent upon improving the performance of the building. Most of them use national, like A to C or A to F, whatever the rating system is. And as long as they can prove that they improve the building performance, they get very good loan terms. Anecdotally, that penciled out just fine for ING. They didn't have as high margins as they do on other loans, but it pencils out just fine. In Canada, Bank of Montreal is doing an interesting partnership with the Development Bank, where they also give favorable terms backed by the Development Bank. So the Development Bank takes the riskier part of the loan. BMO kind of helps with the rest. To install green technology in homes. So there are ways in which they can work with their clients, and a lot of banks that we interact with, we get into that exact conversation. Like, can you encourage your clients to have a home audit? Can you provide them bridge loans? Like, can you be the guy who stands in between the tax rebate from the IRS and the purchase of a home appliance today? Because if my gas boiler dies, I'm not going to wait for your due diligence for a month to get a green loan. I'm going to buy whatever I can today to have heat in my home. So can you be the guy who kind of helps facilitate that? Can you understand your clients better? There's so many things they can do, but it takes will, it takes effort, and a lot of them are just not there quite yet.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What about the Colorado Green Energy Fund, Bank? I mean, they provide low-interest loans for clean energy projects. So I just wonder if talking to them, there may be some ideas on how to do that.
Yeah, green banks are the pioneers of this stuff.
And we have a great one here.
Yeah, we do. We have a great, albeit new one. One of the oldest in the country is Connecticut Green Bank. They were pioneers of CPACE, which we heard about in one of the earlier sessions. They're very much the pioneers. The difference is that green banks have a mandate to make this happen. So their first goal is not shareholder value, it's not profit margins. Their first goal is, let's make this green. And they're willing to give better terms on loans, they're willing to collaborate with government agencies, they're willing to do different things to achieve their mission. When you talk about JP Morgan Chase or any of them, their first goal is their profit margins. Their first goal is their shareholder value. So that's why they don't behave in the way that green banks do.
Quick question for you. You talked about in the Netherlands, kind of targeting the bad guys, giving them favorable loan terms in order to upgrade and retrofit their homes. And in the U.S., it's looking at maybe the good guys who are building the green construction. But both of these are carrots, right? Like both incentives to encourage you to do something and reward you for doing something that we deem to be good.
Yeah.
What about the stick side of the equation? What's that looking like at the moment, either in the US or globally?
I mean, it's usually big bad regulation, right? That's the best stick you can use if you have it. So even these European bankers, they are interested in changing their carbon footprint, but they also have European regulation that states that countries need to be, carbon neutral, or how they phrased it exactly, by a certain year, and banks have their part to play. In the US, one of the newest ones is Local Law 97, which is in New York, and that basically mandates that people need to reduce the carbon footprint of their buildings. So commercial developers are just sitting down and realizing this is a huge bill that I'm looking at, and trying to calculate, is the fine big enough to kind of, like, does it pay off for me to comply or not? So if you make the fine big enough, then they have to do something. If you don't, then they'll probably just take the fine. So it turns into very basic calculus, like, what's cheaper for me, unless you are socially minded, like a green bank, or you're a green developer and you want to make a difference, then that's different. But other than that, it's just pockets and how much it's going to cost you.
Yeah, I know Colorado's been working on some of that too.
Oh boy, how much time do we have?
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So I do want to emphasize a point that kind of goes to your point of how education is so important with this, especially with heat pumps. Energy efficiency does not mean cheaper utility bills, because gas is cheaper than electric. So a lot of times, a lot of households go in thinking that they're being very carbon conscious and they're getting a new high efficiency system, and then they're shocked to see that they're actually paying more certain months of the year to operate that system. But I actually work with the workforce trying to upscale HVAC contractors, and the biggest thing that I see with that is the rebates, the remittance part of it, because the rebate almost falls on the contractor to have to float that in the negotiation part of installing. And if you're a small contractor trying to scale up, that limits the amount of jobs you can have active at once, because let's say $8,000 rebates that you're floating for three jobs. Now, 24,000 you're trying to float.
Yep.
And so part of that problem is that the most qualified contractors we're getting here in these states are larger in nature, coming in from places like Massachusetts. And, when you're talking to someone who's not from Colorado and they're part of a bigger conglomerate, you can kind of feel that they're selling you on these things. So I guess my question here is, what can we do to fix the remittance part of this so that we can actually free up smaller contractors to want to do this work and get it done?
Bridge loans are one way to do it. And I would love it if there was a tighter connection between contractors and, if not big banks, then local banks. CDFIs, green banks. We have a green bank in Colorado. We have CDFIs in Colorado. I think if they can figure out a way to collaborate where some of these financial institutions, especially like mission-oriented ones, can give the contractors options for loans that are favorable, or bridge loans that have good interest rates because they're short. So you're really asking for a loan just for the front, right? So you just need to wait until the IRS gives you money back, then you pay it off, right? So that might give the financial institution some space to give you really good terms. And if you negotiate that, then that might help with the volume. And we do have some really good companies that are, I think Elephant Energy is from Colorado, right?
They're the one from Massachusetts.
They are? Oh no, I thought they were from here.
No, they started in Massachusetts. They do a lot of good outreach and education, but they're one of the imports.
Gotcha. Okay, never mind then. But my answer remains the same though.
Zero and some others.
Yeah, there you go.
I have to say, I have personal experience with that. We have a ground source heat pump, and the contractor, who is very well known in Colorado, said, "No way am I ever going to do it alone. I don't care what the interest rate is. I'm a small business. Forget it."
Oh.
So, and many, it isn't just him, it's many of them. They do not. He said, it's one thing if it's just one resident, but when I'm doing a whole bunch of them during a year, I do not want that on my books.
It's a big risk.
Zero. Yeah.
I mean,
So-
there's a couple of ways that you can try to think of shortcuts. Like, how do you don't have time or staffing or money for a, like, say, proper due diligence to figure out if somebody's creditworthy or whatever. So what are the ways that you can gauge whether, like, how much risk you're taking on, risk of default, through, like, I don't know, credit scores. I don't know if that's a good enough one for them, but in which ways, and then doing some modeling to figure out how many residents you could give loans to like have a reasonable amount of risk, if you can. But I wouldn't expect a tiny contractor to be able to.
He's one of the biggest contractors for ground source heat pumps in the state. So there's not a lot of them, but anyway, he's like, no, we small contractors do not want to do that.
Did he ever think about partnerships with any of the banks?
No, he's like, he's small. He's like, you know, he's got his little group of people, and he's got plenty of work, and he's not going to go beyond that.
Yeah,
So the incentive that we got, to tell you the truth, it was kind of on the table. Okay, you take it, you know, and you know, we'll just kind of like agree that, you know, a year from now, when you get your taxes, that you'll give us a little money back. That's what we're handling.
But that's a relationship based on trust.
Trust,
right? Like,
I know,
that's also
but
risk.
it's our risk. You know, it's
Right.
our money, but we're risking it because we
Yeah.
understand he's a small contractor.
That's fair.
I think we could take maybe one more. Yeah, go ahead.
So back to the regulation side, if you could design a regulation implemented by the government to help incentivize decarbonization in like smaller, like industrial and commercial or maybe even residential spaces, what would you do?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I'm not gonna get into carbon taxes. I think that's one avenue that would make things easier in terms of climate, but definitely more expensive. I think as a consumer, not even somebody who works in climate change, I would love to see this process become just easier on people. To the extent that a regulation, I'm not a regulatory expert, to the extent that regulation can help put some of these pieces together, put the right stakeholders in contact to make it easier for people to figure out what they can do and when they can do it and for how much money, I think that would be great. I mean, tax incentives are fantastic, but most people I know don't really have a year to wait to get $10,000 back. So I don't want to, you know, diss tax credits. I think they're, you know, great that they exist, but I think a lot of people could benefit from more point of sale discounts and then figuring out how we can transfer that risk and how we can manage it effectively.
All right, thanks everyone, and a big thank you to Tamara.
We are here on behalf of your climate program within the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. My name is Clay Clark. I have overseen that program since it was created to help Colorado achieve its climate goals back in 2019. And the folks that you're going to meet here are all part of that work. The work that we do primarily is to measure and inventory all the various sources of greenhouse gas emissions across Colorado's economy, and then develop, primarily through regulation, ways to require those sources to reduce those emissions. And that's what you're going to hear from each one of the folks up here play a part or work on some aspect of those two goals. So with that, I will have each of our panelists introduce themselves. I will say, and I think you heard this when we were sort of doing the early introductions, we want to make this interactive. You know, this is your climate team here at the state. You know, we want to get to know you all, tell you about our work, but also learn about what you're doing. And if you have interest, if there's questions, we'll try to take them along the way. I may try to sort of keep us on track. We'll save some time at the end for questions as well. But again, we do want to make this as interactive as possible. So Matt, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Clay. Hey everybody, my name is Matthew Twyman. I supervise the Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Reporting Unit. As the name really spells it out for you, we compile the statewide greenhouse gas inventory, and we also manage a small set of regulated community members of large emitters across the state.
Hi
everyone, my name is Courtney Wilson, and I am a greenhouse gas specialist in the Rules and Strategy Development Unit here in the Climate Change team, and I also help with our outreach efforts.
Hi everyone, this is Celia White. I'm the emissions credit trading supervisor, so setting up the credit trading programs for the state.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Closer.
Yeah.
I think that was okay. Just a little closer.
Just a little closer. Hi, my name is Bernard Oswald. I am an economist in the climate program. I work on the team. I work on the economic impact analysis that we develop for the rules and program. Yeah.
Everyone, Tim Taylor. I supervise the strategy development unit in the climate change program. And my unit is primarily responsible for developing and implementing regulations to reduce greenhouse gases across the state.
All right, so this is our team, and I mentioned the state's climate goals, and we can go ahead and. Oh, I forgot. The folks behind the scenes here. All right, yeah. So, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Megan McCarthy. I'm the Industrial Decarbonization Lead and helping support the presentation today.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Bones. I actually don't think I needed a mic, but I am a member of the Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Reporting Unit under MAP Climate.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen, for helping work behind the scenes. I appreciate that. All right, so the state's climate goals, if we can go to the first slide. And again, we don't really want to make this a presentation, so we're going to use this as sort of to illustrate some of the things that we're talking about. But we do, again, we want to make this interactive. So the state's climate goals. So in 2019, through legislation, Colorado adopted climate goals of reducing its greenhouse gas emissions across its entire economy 26% by 2025 and 50% by 2030. Subsequently, net zero was added in 2021, so getting to net zero by 2050. You may recognize, so the 26%, the 50%, those are based upon the science-based reduction targets that the US agreed to in Paris back in 2015. So the Colorado climate goals are aligned with the Paris Accord science-based targets. We also have sector-specific targets, and we can skip through them. We have sector-specific targets, but they all feed into the economy-wide targets. So go ahead and move to the next one. So what we're looking at here are projections of Colorado and other states' emissions as they would be using RMI's modeling tool. So this is the track that the states are on, but the gray are other states. The green and yellow are Colorado through the modeling tool. Again, you see with this, the yellow line is based on things that Colorado's already put on the books to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The green line represents what we refer to as near-term actions. Those are actions that are planned to be undertaken in the next 2 or 3 years. So you can see with this, Colorado is certainly on a trajectory to reduce climate pollution, but also I think what is important about this and what this shows is that an economy versus Colorado's can really be put on a trajectory to reduce greenhouse gas emissions very much in line with what was agreed to under the Paris Accord, those science-based reduction targets that were agreed to in Paris back in 2015. So, as a panel, what we are going to talk about is what we have done and what we continue to do to keep Colorado on this trajectory. And I should mention, because I didn't talk about it, but the red line, if you can't tell, is the national average there. So you can see, obviously Colorado is doing much better than the national average. And what we're doing, by 2030, certainly a national. So with that, let's talk about greenhouse gas emissions, talk about what the different sources of emissions are across the state. So here is, let's start with maybe a question for the audience. Who here knows what the largest source of
greenhouse gas emissions in the state is by sector? Any guesses or anyone who knows? Transportation, okay.
Buildings.
Buildings, built environment, all right. Ag, all right.
Oil and gas.
Oil and gas. Any others? Those are all very good answers, and all of those are sources that certainly vie for the top sectors as far as greenhouse gas emissions go. So I think I'll turn to Matt, who's in charge of our inventory, and ask you that same question. Matt, do you want to talk about the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Colorado?
Happy to, Clay. So as of our updated inventory that we released back in November, the largest sector is oil and gas. Now, there's some caveats to all of that. I think what you can see above us, that oil and gas, electric power, and transportation are all splitting about 20% relatively closely. And if you thought of this, how this pie chart has evolved over time, transportation is maybe the lead, and electric power is maybe the lead. And these are all going to be evolving over time. But oil and gas and electric power in particular are expected to really see dramatic declines over the next decade in particular. So these two we expect to be shrinking and not being the largest in not too far of time. The other thing I want to point out is that when we speak to oil and gas here, this is not the full footprint of what people might think of as oil and gas. In particular, it doesn't include combustion-related emissions within oil and gas. That is because of just international accounting standards. That would be over in industrial fuel use. And it doesn't also include things that are related to the deployment of natural gas. So here, this is what we call fugitive, largely fugitive related emissions, venting and flaring as well. So these are process emissions. So if you really wanted to consider the entire footprint of oil and gas, it would definitely be the largest contributor.
So now can you talk a little bit about how we know what these numbers are? How do we know what the emissions are from these sectors?
Yeah, so we, by law, are required to compile statewide greenhouse gas inventories at least every 2 years. That can be increased annually as needed, or we look at individual sectors kind of on an as needed basis. So the inventory is really what informs all of this work.
So how is that data collected, or how do we gather that information that feeds into the inventory?
Yeah, so historically, the state has relied on a tool that EPA provides to the states, and it's available to all states free of charge, called the State Inventory Tool. We recently started to advance beyond that tool. We identified shortcomings in it, certain categories that just weren't estimated, or gaps in time series of data that we just thought we could improve upon. So we've been expanding to now draw upon things like facility reported data that we collect directly as a state, as well as facility reported data that goes to the EPA. We pull from EIA, the Energy Information Administration data, and largely the national greenhouse gas inventory that's then disaggregated down to state levels for each state. So it's becoming a more diverse pool of data and methods that we're drawing upon, and we're always looking for how we can gap fill or refine, improve accuracy, reduce uncertainty, and just generally better cover all the sources in the state. So it's an evolving process.
So as Matt mentioned, so we've got the inventory essentially that comes out every 2 years, but it really is, it's a full-time job to continue to work on that, to continue, as Matt said, for it to evolve. So at this point, Matt, how long is the inventory that we get, the latest inventory that we did?
No. It's kind of a book right now. The report itself, including all of our methods and everything detailed out, is around 400 pages. So if anyone's read it, please let me know.
All right, so obviously it is, that information is there for anybody that wants to use it, but are there other ways that that information is available or more approachable for folks that would like to be able to understand it, but maybe not read all 400 pages?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if everyone got anywhere near that. So we understand that. This is a scientific document. You know, we need to document all of our methods, the uncertainty, where we can improve, and we included a lot of work up front in kind of the about section for all the policies that Colorado's pursued. So it's a big document, but we recognize that, and so we've taken a few steps. We do have an executive summary that's more like 30 pages. I think that's pretty digestible for a lot of people, but we've also produced a 2-page overview document that'll at least get you the high-level summary of what's going on. And then we've made all of our data available. We've put together various dashboards, so Tableau interactive data explorers, that anyone can go access the data, look at it in different ways. And then an important component to the work is also our projections out through 2050. And that was done in collaboration with RMI. Some people may know them as Rocky Mountain Institute. They leverage an online tool called the Energy Policy Simulator. And so anyone can go and look at the work that was done to develop future emissions estimates and actually play with those policy levers to see if we really cranked up electric vehicle adoption, or if we really reduced oil and gas production, or if we did whatever. You can see the relative impacts associated with each of those. So that is just an outstanding tool available to the public.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. And we certainly want to share some of those tools at the end. I think at the end, the time that we have, we want Becca to basically take us for a test drive and to be able to sort of show folks how you can interact with that data. We've got some great dashboards and other interactive information. So all of this data is there, it's in the inventory, but there's also these other ways to access that data. And we'll spend some time showing you how to access that. So maybe we'll end with an inventory question for the audience, and then we'll move on and start talking about some of the regulatory efforts that we do. So in the inventory, what is projected to be the largest source of emissions by 2038?
I actually have a question. If we could go back to the pie chart.
Sure.
Which slides are? Yeah, the big pie chart. The electric power section, is that just electricity? You don't know how it's going to be used?
So it is the scope 1 emissions from the generation of power. So you think about the combustion of coal, the combustion of gas to generate power. That's what's reflected there.
So are these all scope 1?
These are all scope 1 emissions.
There's no 2 or 3, so this is just a...
Right, if you think about it, we have a comprehensive inventory of scope 1 emissions, right? Yeah, I certainly appreciate you from corporate sustainability and efforts to look, say, at scope 2 emissions, but we track the scope 1 emissions directly from the utilities. So it's basically looking at scope 1 across the entire state. I mean, Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm happy to talk more offline or after this about it. But yeah, scope 2 would really be at the corporate level that we need to track, so facility reporting. That right now, we don't have a data collection pathway for that. And scope 3 is definitely at the corporate level. And there's many reasons for us why we, simply right now could not pursue that. But this is an actively evolving space on many fronts. So this is not, we know how we do things and it's always going to be that way. This is a work in progress for development for what information we can provide everybody.
And I will say, as you probably know, there's certainly a growing interest in scope 3. I mean, that is something, I mean, I think we're tracking that as well. I mean, you could see a day where we've got scope 1 inventory, essentially that's the official inventory, here's all the sources of emissions in Colorado, but then also supplements that look at scope 3, recognizing the different efforts and sort of life cycle and all these different sources.
I have no idea what scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 means. None of this question and answers make any sense.
Okay, you know what? Let's we'll back up. We'll do. What are we still got our outstanding question about the source by 2038. But Matt, why don't you just very quickly tell us what scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are?
So scope 1 would be you burn something, you're responsible for that emission. So when we think of the state, we think of all the direct sources that are responsible for producing emissions. When we think of scope 2, that's usually thinking of if you're a customer to a utility, what would be the emissions associated with production and delivery of that that fuel or that energy to you. So if if you own a home, you're renting, scope 2 would be your utility bill and associated emissions. Scope 3 is really a full life cycle. So not only all the emissions associated with the production and transport of products to you, but also downstream use of those products.
Is the oil and gas listed in the figure not accounting for oil and gas used for electricity production?
That's right. I mean, as Matt said, primarily what you're looking at, think about with the oil and gas piece, that's really even fugitive, so think about leaks in the extraction of the oil and gas. The combustion of that would be depending on the use, over in the other wedges.
And what is the electricity mix?
In Colorado. So, big picture, right now, based on legislation that was passed in 2019, the power sector in Colorado has to reduce its emissions 80% from the 2005 baseline. So by the end of 2030, there will be, as planned right now, no more coal used in Colorado. So that mix is getting cleaner and cleaner. The actual sort of, the wedges, if you look at renewables, gas and coal right now, it's certainly moving more towards renewables. I think the last time I looked at it, it was, I'm trying to think, it was maybe a UNO's wedge. Exactly, it's like a third of each, but again, we're sort of, the growth of renewables is happening year over year at a very quick rate.
So tied to that question, right? Electric power is separate from oil and gas, but as renewables increase, would that shrink?
Absolutely, absolutely. So that that kind of goes to this question about what will be the largest sector or largest source of emissions by sector come 2038? Because as you think about this, right, as we move to renewable energy, that essentially is a non-GHG emitting source. So that power with the yellow is essentially going to go away, along with others. So think about then over in the built environment where if you move to decarbonize that and use electricity, all those wedges are getting smaller and smaller, basically based on this backbone of clean energy being put out to the grid that's then being used for transportation, being used for the built environment. So that's how we're making all these wedges become smaller and smaller.
So just tied to that, I mean, have you guys projected like the futures, like in 2030 or 2050, the various scenarios, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Matt can talk about that, but when we do the inventory, an important part of that inventory is not just where were we, where are we, but also where we're going. So we include projections out through 2050. So if you recall, when we were looking at those lines earlier, that's based on taking work to project out through 2050, right? Based on different policy scenarios, depending on action, either based on what's on the books now, what's planned, if it was just going to be essentially business as usual, and sort of projecting out those various scenarios. Anything else to add on that?
I would say I'm happy to talk to anybody right after this. Please don't hesitate to find me.
Any one of these topics is sort of worth a presentation on its own. So, like I say, I think we're trying to keep it at a fairly high level, but again, happy to sort of dive in on any of these. All right, I keep trying to get to this question about what our projections. So by 2038, what is projected to be the largest source of emissions in Colorado?
What I think is projections and the targets that you have to reduce the emissions, they are going to particularly impact oil and gas, electric power. So what I'm thinking that's probably not going to impact it that much is agriculture.
I like your thinking. Any others? That's right. It's actually the ag sector, and and that really is right now relative to other sources. It is relatively a smaller sector as far as sources of emission goes. But as all these others, for the reasons that we're talking about, are going down based on that move to electrification and other mitigation strategies for GHGs. The ag sector actually is projected now to be the largest source of GHGs come 2038. I think we had a guess of ag earlier as one of the largest sources as well, and it's certainly up there, but relative to the other sources right now, it is not the largest.
I'm also just wondering about the trends that you have on projections. So is it correct to say that you have already met your target for 26% reduction?
We'll get to that. We're right at it.
Great questions.
Absolutely. So, sort of shifting away from the inventorying and measuring of emissions, as I mentioned, a lot of the work that we do is really the development of regulations, right? In a perfect world, all these different sectors and sources of emissions would reduce their emissions in line with our climate goals, and we would be well on our way to achieving our targets. What we really typically have to do in order to sort of motivate that change is to put regulations in place. There's a lot of other work that is being done by the Energy Office, obviously, for grants and for other pieces, but a lot of the work that we do is actually the development of regulations requiring those sources to reduce their emissions. So I guess I'd ask the question of the audience, are folks familiar with particular regulations that Colorado has adopted to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? This is my star pupil.
There's a hand on the
We'll come back to you. Okay.
Well, Gem 2.
All right.
And
So Gem 2, for those that are not familiar, that is industrial manufacturing requirements for everything from semiconductors to state's largest refinery, a number of large industrial manufacturing sources.
Clean heat plan?
Clean heat plans. So clean heat plans for gas utilities, that's a requirement that gas utilities reduce their emissions. It's specific to Colorado as well. Midstream oil and gas, that's right. Actually, it's referred to as midstream oil and gas, but it's actually in the industrial sector because it relates to the combustion of fuel, as Matt mentioned, so it's not the fugitive methane emissions, but actually the combustion of fuel. That's right, these are also great answers.
It's the Model Electric and Green Energy Code.
All right, that's
Coming out
right.
this year.
That's through legislation, but that's right. Yeah.
Here in Denver, we've got Energize Denver, building performance standards.
Building performance standards, that's right. We also have a statewide building performance standard.
Buy Clean Colorado.
Buy Clean Colorado, that's a good one. So those are all great answers, and that's right. We really have a lot of regulations in Colorado that many of those are actually first of their kind in the nation. We talked about Denver has a building performance standard. Colorado's adoption of a statewide building performance standard, the first statewide building performance standard adopted in the United States. But what that is, essentially buildings over 25,000 square feet all have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions either through reducing on-site emissions or through the scope 2 emissions, that is the energy used to achieve targets there. So a 7% reduction by 2026 and 20% reduction by 2030. Again, other first of events back in 2014, Colorado was the first state to adopt requirements for oil and gas production to reduce methane emissions. So a lot of firsts in Colorado. Even Gem 1 and 2, those are really novel for the industrial manufacturing sector. There's really nothing else in the country like that as well. So a lot of firsts. So with that, I talked to Tim Taylor, who leads our group that works on our regulatory development. So obviously, a lot of folks are familiar with the work. Maybe just talk generally, Tim, about sort of how regulations are developed, and then we'll talk about some of the specific regulations that we developed in addition to the one we talked about here.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. So it's obviously, a number of you are very familiar with the work that we do, and it's great to hear. But going back to what Clay talked about earlier on how the state adopted greenhouse gas reduction goals in 2019. So the legislature basically gave the Air Quality Control Commission, which oversees Colorado's air quality program, the authority to adopt rules and regulations to achieve the greenhouse gas reduction goals. So that's a broad general authority that the Commission has. And the Air Pollution Control Division, which the climate program is part of, is basically staffed to the Air Quality Control Commission. So responsible for not only proposing rules and regulations, but then also implementing the ones that are adopted by the Commission. So, looking at the slide up here, the first two examples are, really highlight sort of the broad general directive, but then also sort of the specific directive that the legislature has given us to adopt. Rules focused on specific sectors or to meet certain requirements. So our greenhouse gas reporting rule, which obviously is important for our greenhouse gas inventory, the legislature specifically said that we had to adopt a reporting rule that aligned with EPA's greenhouse gas reporting rule. The hydrofluorocarbons, or HFC, phase-out rule, which was actually our very first greenhouse gas reduction regulation, was done under the, again, broad general authority that the Commission was given to reduce greenhouse gases. Now, some of the other rules shown up here, which many of you have identified here today, like Gen 1 and 2, the oil and gas midstream rule, building performance standards, those were all the result of specific directives from the Air Quality Commission to adopt rules for those sectors or sources of emissions. Now, in terms of rule development, the legislature may give directives on, hey, you need to adopt a rule for this sector, but it really is up to our program to figure out the details of what that looks like. Do the technical analysis, outline all the different requirements, and as well, just as importantly, the economic impact analysis of those rules. So it's definitely a process in and of itself, and one which we engage with a variety of stakeholders to come to the best possible rule or regulation for that particular sector where we're trying to reduce greenhouse gases.
Thanks, Tim. And you touched upon some of the rules that are on the list here. So what's on the horizon? What are we going to add to the list next?
Yeah, so currently the rule that we're focusing on, which you may have heard of, is the landfill methane reduction rule. So to go back to that earlier pie chart that showed all the different sectors, Colorado has taken action for all of those sectors, pretty much, except for a few. Ag is one, waste is another. So this is going to be our first sort of regulatory action to reduce greenhouse gases in the waste sector. EPA does already require landfills to reduce their emissions, but that only applies to the largest landfills. So what we're looking to do is have control requirements for more landfills across Colorado.
Thanks, Tim. And so, as Tim mentioned, when we work on a rule, in order to get the rule passed, there's a number of legislative requirements that need to go along with that rule. We have to show that the rule is the most cost-effective option. Typically, we have to do an economic impact analysis. We have to show that the rule is feasible. But as Tim mentioned, one of the sort of core pieces of analysis that we must do at the time is what we refer to as an economic impact analysis. And so Barnabas is our in-house expert, our doctor of economics, and does pretty much all the economic impact analysis, not just now for the climate program, but really for a lot of the other work also that the Air Division does. So Barnabas, talk to us about economic impact analyses, and so how do we go about, as part of that analysis, determining, let's say, the cost of compliance?
All right, thank you, Clay. So when we assess the cost of compliance, we are trying to identify all the costs involved in bringing a regulated facility into compliance. And so as much as possible, we try to have a comprehensive list. And broadly speaking, you can categorize the cost of compliance as having two components to it, which are the capital expenditure and operation and management costs. And capital expenditures, as you probably know, these are usually large one-time investments that you make maybe to purchase and install a new equipment. That's going to allow you to reduce your emission and come into compliance with the regulation. And you also have what are called operation and management costs, which tend to be smaller in size as compared to capital expenditure, but they are incurred year over year. And so we're identifying all these different types of costs, and not just the costs that are large, but also the small ones, and all the costs that are incurred only at the implementation or the start of the implementation of the rule, but throughout the useful lifetime of the equipment. So it's a comprehensive analysis of what it takes for a facility or a sector really to come into the compliance with the proposed regulation.
Okay, so that's on the cost side. Do you want to talk about how we quantify the benefits?
Sure. So on the benefits side, it varies from rule to rule because each rule has some unique benefits that come up that we don't always find with the other rules that are being developed. But the two most commonly assessed benefits that we quantify include the avoided cost of climate change and the health benefits from reducing coal pollution. And so that gives you a sense of how much benefit are going to result from implementing these rules. And ultimately, you are trying to get a sense of how the benefits compare with the cost, and you present that with what's called a benefit to cost ratio, and that tells you how much benefit you can expect to get for each dollar that you're incurring as a cost. And for all the rules that we have developed, we've quantified the benefit to cost ratio, and in all of those cases, we were able to show that the benefits were higher, sometimes by multiple folds. And that's the purpose of the economic impact analysis, is to quantify the net benefits that result from implementing these rules and to explain why we pursue these rules in the first place.
And so related to benefits, we also consider the social cost of carbon. I feel like that term gets thrown around a lot. So can you just tell us quickly what is the social cost of carbon and how we include that in the economic impact analysis?
So the social cost of carbon is a metric that's developed by the Interagency Working Group. It is an estimate of the economic damage that results from one additional ton of CO2 being released into the environment, into the atmosphere. And the way we use it is in quantifying the avoided cost of climate change. With each rule, we have expected or projected emission reductions over a given time frame. We use the corresponding social cost of carbon and some discounting analysis to help us quantify how much climate damage we're avoiding by implementing these rules.
Thanks, Barnabas. So, question over here.
What is the current social cost of carbon?
I'm going to say $107. What is it, Barnabas?
106.
106.
So that's using 2024 dollars.
So that is as of the end of 2024, adjusting for inflation. So it was
105 and 89 cents.
Okay.
To be specific.
So for every, I mean, you think about that. Think about every ton of CO2 going into the atmosphere, essentially costing society over $100 a ton. I mean, it is a remarkably large number that we're costing society with all the GHGs going into the atmosphere. Lots of comments. Sure, go ahead.
What I don't see there is that some of the new technologies also produce direct benefits to the person who's using them. Probably the simplest one to understand is that if you have an EV, which is about the same price as a normal car, the amount of money you're spending to drive around drops by 3/4 or some number like that. Is that included in that? Or I'm wondering if this is a legislative mandate to do it this way, or whether we could also include benefits.
So just quickly, so there is basically a legislative directive in what the EIA must include, what the economic impact analyses must include. But Barnabas also, I mean, he did the economic analysis when we adopted the zero emission vehicle regulations. So certainly can talk very much from experience about what was.
You are absolutely correct. The cost decreases. These are just the two most commonly assessed benefits across that come up across the different regulations. But each regulation has a unique set of benefits that apply to it, and that is actually one of the benefits we assessed when we did the EV rule. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the reduced maintenance costs was certainly one of the things that made EVs much more affordable.
I just wonder what the current social cost of methane is, because to me, that's the biggest thing that's going to change the curve.
Right, and it's not just a matter of multiplying the 28 by the 107 number, the 106 number, right? I mean, there's a specific assigned number for methane from the interagency working group as well.
It is very close to multiplying it.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a 1 or 2%
It's a little
difference. Yes, but it's very close, yeah. So it's around, when using $20 values, I believe it's $2,800 or so per ton.
Right, so when I'm saying the 28 times, right, the GWP or global warming potential of methane being 28 times that of CO2. So apparently you could just do the math that way. I thought it was a little bit different.
Maybe 1 or 2% different, but it's very close.
Okay, I'll defer to my economist. Over here on the left.
So I might have missed the unit of measurement, but when you're saying $106 per ton onto society, are you talking about 106 per person, per town, per 100 people? What's your unit of measurement?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you want to talk about sort of the scope of that? I feel like we've talked about that in other contexts too.
Yeah, so it's a global context. We don't have a good way of reducing it to a given geographic area at this point, because the climate impact projections, when you use a small geographic scale, their accuracy suffers quite a bit. So the geographic scale has to be large, and those are the numbers, those are the geographic scales that we have numbers for at this point.
Any more questions on the social cost of carbon? All right, well, so that economic impact analysis that we include is obviously very important to the development of the rules. There's other factors that we consider in feasibility and other things, but also what is really central to the work that we do is really, stakeholder engagement, learning from communities. I mean, it's certainly a growing understanding that, not only does climate change disproportionately impact various communities around Colorado, so too can the policies that we put in place to address climate change. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is really to try to reach out to those communities and get their input, and particularly those communities that have been and continue to be disproportionately impacted by pollution and other environmental factors. And so Courtney helps lead that work. So Courtney, can you talk about the work that we do to engage the communities?
Yeah, so we actually we have some statutory requirements that tell us to have a certain amount of public meetings minimum, so it's at least 2. The climate change program pretty consistently goes above and beyond that requirement. We do more than 2 meetings, and we do it in multiple different kinds of settings. So we have our very structured public meetings where we give a presentation about our rulemaking and then open it up for public comment. But we also do other kinds of stakeholder engagement with environmental groups through the form of informal workshops. We have one-on-one meetings with other folks in the community. And one of the big issues that we see is that even though anybody can become a party to the rule, literally anybody who's interested can become a party to the rule, they also are faced with a lot of issues with access. So some of the ways that we try to overcome that kind of those barriers or lessen those barriers is through holding those meetings through a variety of different forums. So we can do in-person meetings, we can do meetings via Zoom. Those meetings are often hosted both inside and outside of working hours, on the weekends, in the evenings. And during those meetings, we also include language interpretation. You can request it, any language, we can provide interpretation that way. We also include childcare and or travel stipends. So we really just want to make our reach as big as possible and make sure as many people as possible are allowed to participate.
Thanks, Courtney. Do you want to talk about any of the other things that we do as far as specific engagement with community members or other ways that we try to incentivize folks to
to give us their input.
Yeah, so the main goal is to provide a space for community voices to be heard. Although our rules primarily target greenhouse gases, we also are interested in reducing co-pollutants that have direct impacts on people's health. And so it's really important that we are able to reach those people, and I personally keep a very open line of communication. I picked a really bad day to forget my business cards at home, but you can find me after, and I'll give you my contact information. I keep myself always available, and the climate team, you've heard from a number of us that you can find us at any time, and we're willing to have a conversation. Quick plug. Piggybacking off of what Tim was talking about, we have a landfill methane rule, and we have a public meeting coming up on February 26th from 6 to 8 p.m. that I would encourage you to register for. So if you're curious on how we engage with the community, that's a perfect opportunity to do so.
Thanks, Courtney. So,
oh, yes, good question. So someone asked where it's going to be. It will be via Zoom. And I can provide, if you want to find me afterwards, I can provide the web page. I don't have the URL memorized. But if you Google landfill methane reductions in Colorado, our web page should pop up and you can find the registration link. But again, if you're interested, you can find me afterwards and I'll give you that info.
great, thanks for that. So, as we're developing regulations, one of the really big challenges is finding that balance between trying to achieve the deepest possible reductions, but really balancing that with flexibility, cost effectiveness, trying to find that balance. I mean, we don't want to push essentially production outside of Colorado. We want to make the greenest products here in Colorado. So trying to find that balance is something that is always a challenge. But when we're working with the regulated community, oftentimes we'll go, well, this is just not feasible at this time. But we do have our climate goals, and our charge is to put regulations in place to put the state, or help put the state on that trajectory towards achieving its climate goals. So one of the things that we have developed is our credit trading program. And so you think of a facility where maybe the technology is not there yet, or where it's just not feasible to implement reductions in a way that is in line with those targets that we have. What we will say is, okay, you're going to need to reduce emissions on site up to the point that it's feasible and cost effective, but also you're going to help us achieve our climate goals. If you can't make those reductions on site, you're going to have to pay for those reductions at a different facility. And that's how we utilize our trading program. So essentially, one facility can pay for reductions at another facility where those reductions are more feasible. So that is really at the heart of how we do our credit trading. So Cecilia leads that unit. So Cecilia, do you want to talk to us about how we use credit trading and what that is for our program?
Yeah, thanks, Clay. And it's exciting to be here talking about credit trading, our new programs that are just coming online. So I think everyone here has really set the stage well. We've got the inventory, we've got the regulations, and then we've got the economic analysis and the disproportionate impact of community protections. And then another element of our rulemaking is really the credit trading. So credit trading is a tool, as Clay said, to help us achieve deeper and earlier emission reductions from a group of regulated entities. And Colorado is taking a sector approach to emissions reductions. So that means that our credit trading programs are also focused on particular sectors. We have two credit trading programs in place right now. One is for recovered methane credits, and that is to help methane capture projects from projects like wastewater treatment, the agricultural sector, landfills, gas system leaks, coal mines. So they can all recover methane and apply for credits in the system. And then the gas distribution utilities can buy those credits to help them achieve their clean heat obligations. And then our second program is for the industrial manufacturing sector, and that is currently covering about 23% of that sector. It's the Gen 1 and Gen 2 facilities, so our largest 22 manufacturing stationary sources in the state. And they generate credits if they do more than what they're obligated to do for their 2030 emission reduction obligations. Eventually, that program, the Industrial Manufacturing Credit Trading Program, will expand to cover almost 50%, maybe just over 50% with the midstream oil and gas operators coming into the market, but for now it's just the 23%.
So I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience have heard of cap and trade. So do you want to sort of explain the difference between a cap and trade program and the trading program that we have here in Colorado?
Yeah, cap and trade, interesting. So I'm assuming most people have heard of cap and trade, or at least a few people, but who in the audience has heard of baseline and credit trading program? Our credit trading team.
It works out of the program, so you should know. All right.
All right, interesting. Okay, so cap and trade is where companies are issued or allocated allowances. Those can be auctioned off, and those allowances are equal to the amount of emissions that they're allowed to emit. If they emit less, then they have allowances that they can sell or hold. If they emit more, then they have to buy. They have to buy or surrender allowances so that they can meet their targets. Baseline and credit is different. We're doing an over-compliance market. So it's different to cap and trade. It's baseline and credit. It's an over-compliance market. Essentially, you get credits. You don't get allowances. And you only get credits if you do more than what you're obligated to do by law. So really, we're tailoring this program to encourage real reductions on site at specific companies or facilities. And we're also including protections for our DI communities through stricter requirements before you can access the credit trading market. So Megan, would you mind? So hopefully this visual representation will help explain it a little bit better, but essentially you've got the black emissions limit line in the middle, the black dotted line. That is the limit that each company is required to achieve. And for example, for GEM facilities, our industrial manufacturing regulated facilities, that's currently their 2030 obligation. So typically each company will have a different line, but for simplicity's sake, this visual representation, we're just giving both companies in the graphic the same line. Now, if a company goes below that line, they emit less than that line, they do more than they're obligated to do, then they can generate credits. And that's what company A on your left is doing. So they have their emissions stack, which is that big tower there. They have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by the dark green piece at the top, as well as the light green piece below the black dotted line. And so the light green piece is the credits that they're generating. Now, because there's a credit trading market, those credits go into the market, and company B on your right, they actually can't hit their target. They can't hit their emissions limit through on-site reductions. So what they can do is they reduce their emissions to the dark red amount at the top, and then they buy the credits that company A has put into the market, which is equivalent to the light red piece of this graphic here.
Thanks for that explanation. So there was a question earlier that I don't know that we got to. Did that answer your question?
Well, just clarity, all of this has to take place in Colorado.
These are all within Colorado. That's great. And I think, one thing also about this, the way that the credit trading program incentivizes earlier reductions is, if you think about it, the reduction obligations become more stringent as we move out towards 2030. If you want to generate credits, say in 2025, 2026, you actually have to go below your 2030
emission limit in order to generate credits. And so in that way, again, the trading program incentivizes earlier, deeper, near-term reductions as well.
So what's the valuation of a ton of carbon under the credit program?
That's a very good question. So the credits now, so the first credits are just now coming into the system from recovered methane that Cecilia mentioned, and the credits that are being generated in the industrial sector. So 2024 was the first year of compliance for that. So we're just early into 2025, so those credits are still sort of in process once we know where the facilities are. So at this point, we don't know what the trading or what the value of the credits will be yet. I mean, there's been a lot of folks that have sort of ventured guesses based on other markets, but this market is very different than I think, Cecilia mentioning. It's not like auctioned allowances where it's just such a different process. It's hard to sort of use those prices by analogy to say that's what they'll be in Colorado. So I think it's an open question still.
So you basically have two types of credits, right? Because it's sector-based. Is there a plan to eventually be able to sort of combine them down the road?
That's not an active plan yet, but maybe someday. We'll see. You're right, though, the platform, I think it was mentioned earlier when we were talking about the different regulatory types that we have in Colorado. So we have what we refer to as clean heat plans in Colorado. So those are the requirements upon gas utilities. So the recovered methane credits can only be used by gas utilities towards their compliance. And then the other credits are just in the industrial and manufacturing sector. And they're the platforms that we built for that are similar, but they are separate markets.
So let me jump in real quick. This is such an important session because the theater is empty for the next session. They're going to keep going. And I really salute y'all for what you do. This is huge. This is huge. Government doesn't do enough of this. I really salute what y'all are doing. So I just want to point out, if you see people leaving, it's because other sessions are starting upstairs. But keep going. You guys are doing great.
Well, thank you very much.
This is perhaps our biggest
We do have some other questions, so we'll try to get to that. We're going to sort of wrap things up. We'll look at the sort of projections, but we do want to share some of the dashboards and some of the tools so folks are aware of those as well.
Just really quick question about, you've got a green block and red block, sold and purchased or available and desired. In this early stage, what can you say anything about the balance or imbalance of the needs, the availability versus the need?
Again, markets nascent. We have an understanding that there will be certain sellers of credits. We've certainly heard interest from those that are interested in buying, but at this point, I think it's a little early to venture, sort of the magnitude of either. I think there was one more question. I do want to.
But I can ask it later.
Okay. So we've talked about the inventory. We've talked about the regulatory program. We talked about the trading program. All of these things sort of come together for our North Star, which is to try to move forward and help the state achieve its climate goals. Those goals that we talked about right at the very beginning, that 26% reduction, the 50% reduction by 2030. So Matt, being our inventory guru, can you tell us, so where is Colorado? How are we in relation to those targets?
Colorado is doing remarkably well. I think it's been in the news, maybe we're on a little short of hitting the exact targets, but we are remarkably close. And compared to other state actors, closer than pretty much any other state to achieving similar targets from a similar baseline. I think many attest for me here, but I'm a little more on the optimistic side. I think in terms of being able to bend this climate curve is remarkably hard. It takes early and aggressive action, and I think it's no news that there's a lack of that broadly, both within the nation and across the globe. So the actions that Colorado has taken has put us on an amazing path to getting within spitting distance of achieving these targets. And we still have a little bit of time to go. Of course, things can evolve over time. New administration is certainly a bit of a hump in all of that. But in general, I think this is a true success story and really a model for other states to pursue. Of course, you can see that post 2030, the story isn't quite so nice. I can't water that one down, but there's pretty clear understanding for why that is. So Colorado has developed 2 different greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmaps. That's really a whole of government approach for understanding what different agencies can do to enact change and affect reductions throughout the entire economy. And when they think of that, they're thinking of what can be achieved here and now in the near term, right? We're typically looking out the next 3 years and typically within the same term of a governor. So the state published a pollution reduction roadmap just this last year, and so they're looking out for basically trying to achieve reductions by 2030. There's still a lot of work to get the rest out in 2040 and 2050, and no surprise to a lot of people probably is we're really starting to exhaust the low-hanging fruit. What can be done at low cost, if not benefit, is we're tackling that already in many ways. So the hard things are still to remain. But having said that, just what is already expected to be achieved truly is worth celebrating. A lot of these reductions come from, like Clay was saying at the beginning, the cleaning up of the electric power grid, removal of coal production, fuel switching, generally greening of the electric grid, but also the cleaning up of oil and gas operations. Production is getting a lot, production and midstream and everything are going to be getting a lot cleaner rather rapidly. And there's a whole suite of many other things that are going on. Those are just kind of 2 notable actors.
Thanks, Matt. Maybe we move to the next. So, Matt, you want to talk about this one as well? I mean, we started out here, but I think this is going to sort of to close things out and sort of come back and explain again what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so I'll note there's a lot of notes at the bottom here. So if you want to understand what we did to produce this, of course I can talk about that afterwards. But what we did is we took that energy policy simulator, so the same tool that we used with RMI to generate our projections. They also have models for almost every other state. I think there's 4 or 5, maybe 6 that don't have effective models, or that we know that there were policy actions in place at the state that just hadn't made it into the simulator yet. So those are generally not moving the dial here in general, but what we did is we mapped the most optimistic scenario available for every state. Those are all the gray lines. And we put them relative to a common baseline in 2005, and then said on a percentage reduction basis, how is that evolving over time? And so what Clay pointed out before is that red line represents the aggregate of all the states. What you can see is that is barely achieving the 25% reduction by 2050. Currently, now policies will evolve, this will change over time, but you can see in the background all the lighter gray states. Some are projected to make it down to 2050. I think the only other line out there is California. But in the near term, starting around 2028 or so, Colorado, with our modeling, is shown to be the leader of the pack across the entire United States. So the yellow line is, if we did no more as of today, the policies that are on the books, that's what that would get us. And then the new set of these near-term actions that the state is pursuing over the next few years gets us these additional reductions that represent the green line. And so we're really, like I said, just leaders of the pack in terms of actual action that is affecting real change.
Thanks, Matt. All right, so I think one of the other priorities that we have as a program is to really try to share this information, all the information behind what we shared with you here today, the data. We have dashboards that we put together, ways to access the inventory. And so we want to take some time now. And so Rebecca's going to walk you through some of those tools and take some time. And hopefully if there's questions, we can maybe look at different sort of areas of interest to folks in the crowd here, but just sort of walk through this, just to make sure that people are aware of this information. We have put this all together, but we really are sort of in the process of sustaining a lot of this up, so we want to get the word out that this is available for anybody that wants to use it.
Okay, can you share what you Okay, great. Okay, so as Matt previously mentioned, the inventory and reporting unit launched 2 online interactive dashboards last year. We have the inventory greenhouse gas inventory explorer and the facility reported greenhouse gas explorer. So before I quickly dive into this, I just wanted to mention that our team is committed to improving the way that we present information to the public. And so through that, we are prioritizing moving beyond these static reports to make our information more usable, accessible, and informative for decision making. So these dashboards represent our initial efforts to do so, and we are excited to continually improve them over time. And with that, with the next few minutes, I would like to kind of showcase some of the current features that we have on our dashboards. So for both of the dashboards, each dashboard can be accessed via our dedicated CDPHE inventory or reporting web pages. We do provide the underlying data set for each explorer, as well as resources within, such as definitions, acronyms, links to other resources as well. All of our graphs are interactive, and additional information is actually provided in the tooltips when hovering over the graphs. And we also do include instructions, menu selections, navigation buttons, and infographics that are provided on each dashboard to kind of help guide the user through the experience. So beginning with the Inventory Greenhouse Gas Explorer, this Explorer was designed as a companion tool with our State Colorado statewide inventory, so this will be updated alongside that or as needed. At this time, you can drill down to sector, subsector, and category level emissions in some places, but if you do want to dive deeper into the data, we do provide that as a download. So just touching on a few of the tabs that we do include, this is the snapshot that we have. You can look at emissions in a given year. You can filter by sector, subsector, greenhouse gas. And then additionally, like I said, or like I mentioned before, the specific information such as shares of statewide emissions are included in the tooltips. Moving forward to another dashboard, we have the Change Since 2005 dashboard. This focuses on statewide and subsector magnitude and percent change in emissions since 2005. Again, we include a lot more information in the tooltip so you can get specific values that you're trying to pull. We also build sector-specific dashboards for each of the high-level sectors that we include in the inventory. This includes the emissions by greenhouse gas, by subsector. We also include some tables in the tooltips here, as well as projections from each of the scenarios that we modeled from our environment. Trying to get that just a second to pop up. There we go. Okay, so these are a lot of the features that we have included in our Greenhouse Gas Inventory Explorer, and love for you to kind of check it out on your own. But moving forward to the facility reported data Greenhouse Gas Explorer, this one is designed in alignment with the Colorado and EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program. So it currently only includes, it includes data from regulated facilities for years 2010 to 2023. It currently only includes emissions from direct emitters, and we are looking to add information from suppliers and underground injectors in future updates. Again, all of the data is available for download. And just really quick, I wanted to point out that the data referenced in this tool, including like the facility data, as well as the disproportionately impacted community or DIC map layer, are always evolving, and we are dedicated to aligning with the latest and most up-to-date information whenever possible. So just super quick, wanted to touch on a few tabs here. We have the facility emissions map that provides a map of the regulated facilities in Colorado. You have the opportunity to filter based on searching for a facility, a county, greenhouse gas, as well as subpart or source category defined under EPA's Title 40, Part 98. This tab also provides a DIC layer, which is displayed at the census block level, which is sourced from Colorado's EnviroStream tool. Disproportionately impacted communities, sorry about that. So again, tooltips here provide specific additional information. We have countywide emissions as well as trends in facility emissions. And then the last tab that I'm going to touch on is the facility emissions comparison tab, which shows facility emissions with the ability to highlight specific facilities located within 2 miles of the DIC, disproportionately impacted community. You can also zoom into the graph, move around, as well as select specific facilities to highlight, as well as using this option over here. So while this is only a brief overview of our explorers, we encourage you to check them out on your own. If you have any feedback on either explorer, we would love to hear from you. And we ask that you please send any comments to climatechange@state.co.us. Thank you for your time.
Or where was the landing page for that again? The landing page, yeah, so they're on, oh, sorry.
These explorers can be found on our dedicated CDPHE greenhouse gas inventory or reporting. You can Google those subtext. Should put you.
Unless there's any more questions, I think we'll conclude with that. Thank you all for your attention. Oh, we have one more question.
Yeah. I have been talking to METEC, you know, the Methane Emissions Technology Center up at CSU. This is a conversation a couple years old. And they said one of the things they really needed was, in order to reduce methane emissions, is to know what the industry operators, like oil and gas, are doing, the actions that they're doing on any particular day, and correlate that to satellite data. And I know that the Governor Polis had issued an executive order a couple of years ago asking industry to voluntarily report things like when they have a flare or something else, so you can really target the bad actors. So I was just wondering what has been done over the last several years to address that.
Maybe I can start that, and then Matt wants to jump in on that, or Tim. I know Tim's got a lot of experience on this as well, but we certainly have worked closely with CSU. You know, as I mentioned, we were the first state essentially to regulate methane from oil and gas production starting back in 2014. And we have really continued to build upon that work, including working with CSU and other institutions to sort of refine that. You want to talk a little bit, I mean, so in full transparency, Matt is a CSU grad with a master's in carbon accounting, so I think he's probably got some insight to CSU. And then Tim has worked extensively on oil and gas monitoring, so maybe if you both want to just sort of touch on different pieces of that.
Okay, I'll tee some things up hopefully for Tim. There's a few things that are tied to what you're talking about. One of those is there's a trend and need for being able to produce what's called measurement-informed inventories, right? So a lot of the work that we do and has historically done everywhere is more what's called bottom-up inventories. So you collect some information about activity data, maybe you use some standard off-the-shelf emission factors, maybe you are able to generate custom ones, but you are not really relying on measurements of the actual emissions. You're estimating those emissions, right? So the current need, and EPA has had dramatic overhauls of how reporting is done, and that was largely modeled off of work that Colorado was doing as part of the upstream intensity verification rule, is to have operators report actual measurements. And there's already been work within Colorado to try to true up this bottom-up and top-down, and to produce a true measurement-informed inventory. To do that, satellites, aerial campaigns, ground surveys, all those things, a lot of times what they are doing is not actually measuring the emission magnitude. They're measuring concentration of gas. And what you need to be able to convert that to the actual value of the emissions is a lot of modeling, air dispersion modeling. You gotta have ground truth information for what was going on. And then to be able to attribute that to the actual source you need to know the activities that were going on at that facility at that particular time. And so the voluntary effort that we were just talking about, right, is one thing. I can't speak to the success of that voluntary action, but part of what the parallel program does that we work very closely is the Office of Innovations and Planning. Don't let the name fool you, they do amazing things on this front. But they have a reporting program under Air Regulation 7 called ONGAIR, so Oil and Gas Annual Emissions Inventory Reporting. Another first in the country of collecting every single oil and gas producing facility in the state has to report their emissions. That is one part of the piece. They also have these aerial campaigns that have been going on for a while, and it's part of that entire effort. Now, they have sometimes good success working with operators to be able to get that information, and a lot of times it's because they've seen like a super emitting event, or they see something that they need to use to help calibrate other things that are going on. It's a massive effort. It's something that is ongoing and will continue to need to be ongoing for a while. But the whole goal of this is to try to, monitoring is an expensive endeavor. And yes, we would love operators to do that, but that's not always feasible. Everyone wants the simple approach of just give me some numbers and we'll do the simple math. It's not that hard, right? So part of it is trying to get to improved emission factors. Part of it is trying to understand the more comprehensive suite of activities that are producing and recalibrating those emissions. But ultimately, it's trying to get to that reconciliation between bottom up and top down, so we can say, all right, we have a better understanding. There's a gap. We know how we can use the existing methods to try to better estimate future emissions without the whole large effort of constant monitoring. But having said that, more and more satellites, there's no shortage of data that's going to be coming online, and the coverage is just improving. So because the real challenge with, I can talk about this all day long, but it's really you take, right now you get snapshots, right? And you're trying to say, we measured something for a second, and we did that 3 times in a year. And then trying to take that and say, well, we're gonna try to estimate the entire time series now for the whole year. There are methods for doing that, and the ways for reducing uncertainty on that are improving all the time. But consider that compared to the approach that we take with the bottom up, which is really representing the entire time series, all the activity throughout the year. So there's strengths and weaknesses and pros and cons and challenges for every which way. We know there's a gap. We're trying to find ways to close that. So I don't know what I left for Tim, but Tim has a very rich experience.
No, but you definitely covered all the important points there. I think the main thing to highlight here is that beyond an executive order, it is a requirement for oil and gas companies to have to track these activities and report their emissions. And really what Matt talked about is refining the way that they do that. So not just relying on emission factors or certain assumptions, but also using monitoring and measurements to help inform those calculations. But they are already required to do that under the oil and gas emissions inventory reporting, and then the oil and gas greenhouse gas intensity rule that applies to upstream oil and gas. So, they're required to reduce their emissions by a certain amount, and they have to rely on monitoring to help inform the emissions that they're reporting for that purpose. So it is a requirement already. Obviously, it is important to understand when you're doing monitoring what is going on at that time. ETEC has engaged in a pretty comprehensive study that incorporates both of those elements of monitoring and also working with operators to understand what was happening at the time when the emissions were detected.
So are they supposed to, in this reporting, just say, here's our ongoing activities, or do they have to also report, we just had a flare, we're doing something else? Do they have to report all those things, activities?
Yeah, anything that's pretty much, the oil and gas emissions inventory reporting accounts for any activity that's going to result in emissions. So flare downtime, or let's say pigging, where they're cleaning out a pipeline, that's going to result in emissions, upset conditions. So yeah, it's trying to be as comprehensive as possible in capturing every activity that could result in emissions.
What's the threshold for companies that have to report that? Like, is it size or is it like production or?
On the inventory reporting, that's a great question.
But there are thresholds.
Yeah, I don't believe there are either, yeah.
Yeah, it's all in for every operation in the state, which is different from federal reporting, which does have thresholds.
Okay, so it's intrastate, it's not interstate?
Yeah, that just applies to Colorado.
Right, because I mean, we are a state agency, right, so our authority is really just within the borders of Colorado. You know, just to build upon what Tim and Matt were saying, you know, what's exciting now is really, Colorado's been a leader in oil and gas regulation, in particular, you know, on the methane side there, and you know, we're able to take those lessons learned, and now, given the sort of advancement with technology, you think about satellites, and now with the resolution with satellites, we're able to take that now, and that's really what we're trying to do now with landfills. So taking, you know, the experience that Tim has with the monitoring in the oil and gas sector, and really now trying to bring that over and utilize that for landfills. And again, if we develop the rule in the way we're intending, I think we really will be the first state to utilize satellites and this that sort of information. So if we're seeing something by satellite, essentially, you know, a call would go out to the landfill and say, okay, you know, this anomaly was noted, you need to go out and you have X number of days to, you know, address that problem. And, you know, and that's sort of the way it's with leak detection and repair in oil and gas, but we're going to sort of bring that over now to landfills as well. So everything we're doing is sort of building, and it really is an evolutionary process, just as the technology gets better to track these emissions. All right, question back here.
How do you track it if you somewhere in Durango, it is the border from New Mexico? If the air quality is changing from there, how do you track it? Right there at the border. But there's a lot of extraction in that area. How do you track it with the satellite? Do you know it's coming from New Mexico or it's coming from Colorado?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and there's obviously there's you know, a couple of things there. You know, there's local pollution, right? That is an issue. But then, you know, what we're talking about is, you know, global pollutants. But I think, you know, as I say, with the satellite now, with the resolution, you can actually almost pinpoint the source of the emissions. I mean, the resolution is getting that much better. I don't know if you know, Tim or George is here somewhere too, and he's worked on this. But you want to talk a little bit about sort of the accuracy of what the satellites can see, say, with things like Carbon Mapper or other sources.
Yeah, I mean, for greenhouse gas monitoring, you can determine the source of the emissions, so like the facility or the location where it's coming from. And so that is what we're relying on. You know, it's monitoring that's done within a geographic area, obviously within Colorado, and being able to pinpoint, you know, like a landfill, you know, with a satellite, being able to see, okay, look, the emissions are obviously coming from this landfill. We don't know exactly where the landfill may be, and so then, you know, it requires having to notify the operator, and they investigate it. And again, similar to oil and gas, maybe there was something going on at that time that was causing that emission, those sorts of emissions, and having to have to address that.
My question is about how can you can do pinpoint that area? Because I used to travel that area. I was working for the guys at oil companies that I work for General Motors. So when you're right there around the four corners, you Cortez, Colorado, right there, they're extracting here, here, and here. So you already be accurate. How do you get that? That's what I'm getting.
Can you repeat the question just so I can understand?
As I understand, maybe I can paraphrase and tell me if I'm getting it right. So,
yeah.
Okay, I think the question is when you're, say, in some area around the four corners where you've got multiple jurisdictions, you have sources of emissions sort of coming from multiple places. How do you really know what the source of those emissions are? Is that a fair understanding?
Yeah, and I know that was in the news where they identified a large, like the Four Corners region being a large source of methane emissions in general, right? So, but the sort of the individual monitoring does allow you to know where exactly that's coming from, you know, versus overall emissions and then also individual sources. So, you know, you can determine geographically where it's located, what's contributing to the overall emissions.
Is there some kind of effort to create enough positive incentives to the oil and gas industry, say to bring them on board and then advocate for similar programs in other states?
Well, I will say, you know, what the federal government has attempted to move forward with is really in large part based on what Colorado did, you know, starting, like you say, back in 2014. Whether industry was motivated to do that sort of on its own, I think is maybe depends on who you ask, but I think that the model is certainly based on what Colorado pioneered. And Tim, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, there are incentives and already outside efforts beyond regulation that even preceded regulation to reduce emissions. So, you know, both government and industry-led. So, I mean, EPA has what's called the Gas Star program. It's a voluntary initiative for oil and gas companies to reduce emissions. That's been around for a long time. In fact, a lot of lessons learned from that have been applied within a regulatory context. But then you also have industry-led initiatives like One Future, where oil and gas companies commit to, you know, for example, reduce their methane leakage to 1% of their total production. And oftentimes that is through advanced monitoring. And so, you know, I think you see some of these companies, they join these initiatives because it's good PR for them, and you know, but also it helps them to meet any applicable regulatory requirements as well.
I didn't get to hear your whole presentation, but I'm just wondering if you could address a little bit how you guys, it's so beautiful to live in a state. I was born here in Boulder, don't hold it against me. But it's so beautiful to live in a state of such active folks. And I find what's the most important thing about the diffusion curve is just to get momentum going. And Colorado's gotten so much momentum, it's, people can get disempowered by thinking, oh, problem is so big. We can't, all these people are naysayers and what are we gonna do? And the key for any product idea diffusion is just to get the movement going from innovators all the way to the libraries, right? But I'm wondering how you all, and thank you so much for your work, how you all maintain your spirits and keep positive, because that's the key. Like, this is better for everyone. That's the frame. There's no sacrifice to saving civilization. That's a great thing to have. You know, right now we're seeing in Washington how bad it is not to have civilization. You know, anyway, how do you keep your spirits up, and how do you recommend to us to keep working to build momentum? Drugs are okay, whatever it is. Coffee.
Thanks for allowing me to talk about drugs on the panel, but I think for me, at least from an outreach perspective, it's really empowering to see just how many people are involved and motivated, and you know, we do get a lot of bad news of things that are going on in not only Washington but also globally. There are a lot of disasters that it does feel very big sometimes, and it's just really heartwarming and motivating to see people, especially, I promise I'm not advertising too hard, but especially seeing people come to our public meetings and we have very unexpected participation, and people are really interested and they really have a lot to say. And I know for me personally, this is work that I believe in down to my core, so it's I get up and I do it every day because that's what I believe in. I don't think any of us are here for the money, so.
I was gonna say, I could add something. Yeah. I haven't gotten to talk too much. I think, you
really exciting to be part of this effort in Colorado, and to Courtney's point, see the public interest and the participation. And even back a decade ago, Colorado was the first in the 2014 oil and gas methane reduction rules, and that became a model for the larger nation. And so I think something that inspires me is knowing that our work has the potential to be a model for other states, other regions around the world. We're kind of designing a lot of this from scratch, and it's exciting and it's new, but it's also really challenging and really scary sometimes. So kind of keeping our eye on the North Star. The charts that Matt was explaining about how well we're doing and how the momentum has built, or I think that helps to get me at my desk in the morning. But I mean, I think especially with global and national transitions that are going on, I'm really proud to be in Colorado, and it's just a great place to live right now, and we want to keep it that way. So.
If I may add, I was on a global webinar last week, and CDPHE's logo was one of the exemplars of what work is happening. So you guys should be really proud of it.
Give me the chills.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ready?
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.